Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. My name is Robert. I'll be your host. This is our history program on the John F. Kennedy assassination. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. So, the Kennedy assassination took place on November 22nd, 1963. So, 62 years ago today, the assassination took place, and thought we would do once again our annual program on this. I think we started doing these back in 2020 during COVID. So amazing it's been that long. And we'll talk about different aspects of the Kennedy assassination, both before, during, and after this monumental event. In particular, what I thought I would do is it's not just going to be about the shooting and then, we go home. I thought we'd give maybe a little different perspective on things. So we'll talk about the historical context of things that took place before, during, and after the assassination. There's a lot of fictitious stuff floating around about the Kennedy assassination. So we talked about fact versus fiction. I'm joining you from Texas, and so I thought we would include the Texas connections to the assassination, not just Dallas, but also San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Fort Worth, etc. And then I didn't want to just be like a total downer and talk about the assassination itself without including some information on President Kennedy's legacy. So, my name is Robert. I'll be your host. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I was an art history major in college at the University of Michigan. Let's see, I've lived in Southern California, Washington, D.C., and now Texas, in addition to Detroit. And for many years, I've done these in person tours related to presidents and first ladies. Just so you know, I'm an independent. I'm neither a Democrat or Republican. And I was talking about this with my wife, Michelle. I've actually done a lot of tours in person related to the presidents and first ladies. So when I lived in Southern California, I did tours of the Nixon Museum and the Reagan Museum. In Washington, D.C., I did tours of the Smithsonian History Museum, the Smithsonian Art Museum, the White House Gardens, the Lincoln Assassination, the Booth Escape Route, the Lincoln Memorial, Eleanor Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy in Washington, D.C., and the Watergate All the President's Men tour. And here in Texas, I've given tours of the Kennedy assassination in Dallas, also the Lyndon Johnson Museum in Austin, and the George W. Bush Museum in Dallas. So interesting. I didn't realize I had done this many of these until I was talking about it with my wife, Michelle, earlier. So FYI in that. And we also have our good friend Petty joining us. Hi, Petty. How are you? Oh, and as far as most inspiring person, I'm going to go with Ulysses S. Grant. How about that? And hi, Petty. How are you? Do you want to introduce yourself? And who's your most inspiring person?
Yeah, Patty from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the famous Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and let's see. I'm gonna cheat and do two. I'm combining two from the last couple of nights. Abraham Lincoln, just for the the incredible job he did at a very critical time, and also Ken Burns, who has taught us to love and appreciate American history in a much deeper way than we might otherwise have.
Okay, well, awesome. Well, thanks, Patty. Thanks for joining us. We also have our good friend Brad joining us. Hi, Brad. How are you? Do you want to introduce yourself? And do you have a
Sure.
most inspiring person?
Brad, I'm calling from Falling Waters, Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, originally from Connecticut. And I guess the most meaningful person in American history, anyway, for me at this point, would be George Washington, but there are others.
Oh, okay. All right, very excellent choices. I did see that our friend Joanne is joining us from Dallas. Hi, Joanne. I don't know if you can hear me, but if you want to chime in at any point in time, feel free to do so. Joanne lives with me here in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and she's super knowledgeable about history. And she gave a really cool tour on the women's suffrage movement a few months back. And we're also going to be doing a classical music program with Joanne at
Yes,
some point in time in the
yes.
future. Hey there, Joanne. How you doing? Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Anything you want to introduce yourself, and do you have a most inspiring historical person?
Oh, yes, Alice Paul and the Silent Sentinels. Yeah, I think without Alice Paul, it would have taken 10 times more effort to get that 19th Amendment into the Constitution. And say this point blank, she deserves as much recognition as Martin Luther King, Gandhi and Mandela.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot. I saw you out in the audience,
I
like,
was
oh, Joanne's here.
surprised.
So welcome.
I'm,
Feel free to chime in
yeah,
whenever you want.
I did push for getting some programs on, the great classics. Um,
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna need to reach out to you on that.
I'm looking forward to seeing again Amadeus and Immortal Beloved. I
Oh,
saw
thank
them
you.
years and years ago. I'm looking forward to seeing them again.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Be reaching out to you very, very soon. As soon as
Okay.
work calm down. Let's see. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, John F. Kennedy, you may know this already, but he was the fourth American president that was assassinated. The first was, of course, Abraham Lincoln in 1865. The number two and number three presidents aren't as well known. So, President James Garfield was assassinated in 1881, so just 16 years after Abraham Lincoln. And then 20 years later, in 1901, President William McKinley was assassinated. And I feel like Garfield and McKinley, um, not completely forgotten about, but not as well known as Lincoln and Kennedy. Well, maybe the
I think they're
programs
both
are going
well
today.
known for the vice presidents who had to fill their shoes.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that briefly? I don't want to go
Well,
off too much on a tangent.
no, just Chester Arthur, who was a Tammany Hall stalwart, ended up being the one who really ended the patronage system in DC and established the civil service. And McKinley, of course, made way for Teddy Roosevelt, who accomplished a lot of major things. So, like I said, both probably better known for their, although Chester Arthur probably isn't that well known to many people who aren't familiar with the whole patronage issue and what happens with corrupt appointments versus the civil service system that tried to eliminate as much of that corruption. But it was the somebody who had a beef about not getting a patronage appointment that actually killed Garfield. So
Mhm.
it was kind of a triumvirate of people that brought about the end of that. So
And then you have Andrew Johnson taking over after Abraham Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson taking over after Kennedy. So kind of a interesting mix of successors to the presidents. Let's talk briefly about the historical context of the Kennedy assassination. We'll get into, again, the actual shooting itself a little bit later, but some historical context first. So, interestingly enough, John F. Kennedy was killed on November 22nd, 1963. He had actually just celebrated his 10-year wedding anniversary to Jackie. They were married on September 12th, 1953. Nice wedding photo of them. If you want to learn more about the Bouvier Kennedy wedding, we did a program on this, I think maybe a couple years ago. Oh, yeah, we did it for the anniversary back in 2023. And it's on both our Washington, D.C. History and Culture YouTube channel and our Texas History and Culture channel. It's basically like a walkthrough of what it would have been like to attend their wedding. So you can go check that out. And let's see, 1963 was a big year for a lot of other things, not just the Kennedy assassination in August 28th. So just a few weeks before President Kennedy went to Texas, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech on the National Mall. And President Kennedy was one of four great American leaders that were shot and killed during a very short 4.5 year span. So, of course, you have President Kennedy, also Malcolm X, Dr. King, and then President Kennedy's brother Robert. So, a very tumultuous time, a lot of political and social upheaval taking place in America at this point in time. Let's see. I like to think of the Kennedys, in my opinion, as kind of the first quote unquote modern first couple. And what I mean by that is if you think about their predecessors, the Eisenhowers and the Trumans in particular, yeah, they were covered in the media and a lot of people were following what they were doing. But when the Kennedys came into the White House, they took it to a whole nother level. And it's kind of been like that ever since. I mean, pretty much anything the president and the first lady does is closely scrutinized by the press, for better or for worse. And in my opinion, that really took off during the Kennedy administration. They were frequently the subject of magazine covers, whether it was Time or Life or Look. And I've gone back and looked at like magazine covers that the Eisenhowers and the Trumans on, and yeah, they were covered, but nothing like the Kennedys. And this kind of has continued on to present day. Oh, someone, Elizabeth mentioned that Medgar Evers was also assassinated in 1963. Thanks. I appreciate you mentioning that. And not just like political or mainstream magazines, but all different types of stuff. So you have Sports Illustrated, Ebony, and not even just American magazines. There's Canadian magazines and French and British magazines. Here's Paris Match, and they're on the cover of that. So just an incredible amount of media coverage and public fascination with the Kennedys. And then also, this is the beginning of the television era. And so that also plays a part in the Kennedys being like, quote unquote, the first modern uh, first couple. And I thought this was an interesting statistic. So this is American television ownership by household. So you can see that in 1950, only 9% of the households in the US had a television set. And in 1948, pretty much nobody had one. Fast forward a decade or 10 years to 1960, the year that President Kennedy was elected, that shoots up to 87%. And so he's going into the White House at a time when this television thing is really surging. And that really plays a part in kind of documenting what's going on with President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy. And, if you think about President Kennedy, there's all these television moments that he was involved in, everything from the Kennedy Nixon debates to his inauguration to the assassination, the funeral, etc. And if you think back to Truman and Eisenhower, they were both very successful presidents in their own right. How many like video clips can you think of Truman or Eisenhower? I mean, yeah, there's a few here and there, like Truman firing MacArthur and Eisenhower gave an important speech on the Cold War. But again, President Kennedy really kind of took things to a whole nother level. And not that he did it by himself. I mean, he's coming into office when television is surging. And so that really plays a part in kind of recording what took place in his administration. And if you think about, again, all these television moments that the Kennedys were associated with. So the Kennedy Nixon debates were televised. You've probably seen John F. Kennedy's inauguration speech, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Jackie's famous White House tour, the assassination with the Zapruder film, even the Kennedy funeral with John Jr. giving the salute, just all this television stuff is really interesting how it recorded them much more closely than his predecessors were covered. Let's see, why don't we check in quickly with Patty, Brad, and Joanne? Any thoughts on the Kennedys in this media era, so to speak?
Well, obviously, the fact that they were the first family in I don't know how long, because I don't really follow the children that much, but they were the first in many years to have young children, and also Jackie had given birth, I think, just shortly before the inauguration, and then yeah, because John's birthday was in November, I think,
That was
and. She actually had a miscarriage while they were in the White House, or a premature birth, I think.
Patrick. He
Yeah,
died.
Yes.
we'll talk about that in just a little bit later.
So that would have attracted, again, you're talking about the baby boom generation. So most of the families at that time had children. So that was an aspect that tied a lot of people together. Before we go on, yes, okay, you've noticed it because I was going to ask
Okay,
people to
yeah, we
try
took
to moderate themselves.
we took Patty, we took care of it. All set.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. I
I just
found
want
it.
Jackie wanted the White House to be the American Versailles, and I think she succeeded very brilliantly. And yeah, the Kennedys, they brought glamour to the White House. They were masters of the media. A lot of Berliners who heard his famous speech, Ich bin ein Berliner, pardon my awful German, said they said it was such a revelation because they said previously, they had been governed by their grandfathers, and to see someone of their own generation, someone who was, hip and cool and all that, being in leadership, it was very inspiring to them.
That's a great point. I forgot to mention, yeah, his speech in Germany. A number of people have seen that as well.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I watched the video. It's amazing how well it holds up. I mean,
Let's see. Brad, Patty, any other thoughts before we move on?
No, just again to ask people to try to moderate their comments a little bit to, you know.
Okay. All right. Let's continue on. So again, the Kennedy-Nixon presidential debate, a really defining moment in television history. There hadn't been a presidential debate like this before, and while there's been many presidential debates since then, I would argue this is the most famous presidential debate. So a big
Just to
television.
comment on that, that people who listened to that on the radio thought one candidate won that debate, and people who saw it on TV thought a completely different candidate won that debate.
Correct. Let's see.
yeah, I saw there was a really cute comment. Gene Tierney, the movie star, dated JFK. And when he won the presidency, she sent him a congratulatory note, even though she voted for Nixon. I thought that was very gracious.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't
that
hear that.
sort of graciousness, that doesn't happen nowadays.
No. um, and then again, another television moment, the Kennedy inauguration. I mean, think back. How many quotes from a presidential inauguration can you reel off? Maybe like some recent ones, but the ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I mean, perhaps one of the most famous presidential inaugural lines in history. And of course, that was a television moment. And then what about Jackie's White House tour? Um, I mean, honestly, nothing against all the other first ladies. Can you think of any other first lady that had like major television moment like that that was really like a history defining type of thing
Even
that was kind of a whole
even
nother level? What's
e-
that?
even in black and white, she came across beautiful. I mean, and very sophisticated and able to present the White House in a way that made people feel like she really believed that it was their home, not just hers.
Yeah, maybe that was the cognitive dissonance that keep experiencing when we see that Jackie movie because she always emanated grace no matter what she was doing. And that is not the part that comes through, I think, in that movie that we saw last night.
That's sort of a built-in thing, and I don't think Natalie Portman had it. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, no, I would. I can see where you're coming from in that, Brad. And then, of course, the assassination itself. I mean, the Zapruder film. I mean, I'm sure 99% of the people here have seen it or at least familiar with it. Another television moment, and then it's just been played over and over again. And it's probably if you think of terms of video footage of the president, I can't think of anything else that if you had to make a list of like the most watched things, as tragic as this is, I can't think of any other presidents who's like a video clip of them is like well known or widely seen as this one, especially from like a historical context, maybe something more recent. And then of course there's Walter Cronkite announcing the death or announcing first that President Kennedy had been shot, and then later announcing that he had died. Another important television moment. I mean, I saw an article a few months back. It was like the 10 most defining moments in television history, and this was one of them just because of the significance of it. And then, of course, Oswald, he was shot and killed in Dallas on live TV, so another television moment. And then the funeral was also broadcast. So if you talk to someone that was alive back then, it was pretty much nonstop programming, which was really unusual. We're kind of used to that now in the 24-hour news cycle, but that was pretty unusual for that era. So again, all these television moments, in addition to the magazine coverage and newspaper coverage and different media, really makes the Kennedys kind of the first couple, so to speak.
I think that's the first and only time I can remember the TV being on most of the time that we were awake. And on a working farm, that's very unusual that somebody was always paying attention to the time
Okay, well, that's a good, that's interesting memory, Patty. Thanks, appreciate
for those
that.
3 days. You know what I mean? It's like it was so disorienting that people felt like they needed to be attached. And I really suspect that was when Walter Cronkite became the most trusted man in America for quite a few years thereafter.
Yeah, it wasn't just for announcing the death of Jim Morrison. I mean, it was I thought that was funny because when I was researching the Doors, I actually didn't know that he had made the announcement about his death, so I thought that was interesting. But anyway,
Oh, exactly.
um,
All I could think of was the JFK announcement, so I was kind of surprised myself when you showed that. But yeah, it was actually, I mean, a lot of people think that when he finally gave his impressions after visiting Vietnam, I think a lot of people, including LBJ, thought that that was the turning point right there.
oh yeah. All right. So, what were the Kennedys actually? Why were they in Dallas? Why weren't they in Washington, D.C. during this time? So, let's go through some of that. This is really interesting. I find this fascinating. C-SPAN, for several different times over the course of recent history, they surveyed professional historians and said, "Hey, who do you think is the best and worst president?" and rank them all from high to low. You can see Abraham Lincoln. He's been consistently the top president according to, again, this is not just random people on the street. This is professional historians, hundreds of them. And Abraham Lincoln is always at the top of the list. So you can see that. George Washington second. And so look down and, okay, wow, John F. Kennedy, he's ranked number 8. That's pretty amazing when you consider the number of presidents we had. So that's very impressive. And
Oh, we
also, it's
don't
been
have a
very
picture.
consistent. What's that, Patty?
We don't have a picture that you're referring
Oh,
to.
why is that? Let's see.
All I have is okay. There it goes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate that. Sorry, I must have pressed the wrong button.
Mhm.
Anyway, this is the C-SPAN Presidential Historian Survey. They survey hundreds of historians, and you can see Abraham Lincoln. He's always been at the top of the list. But John F. Kennedy, a very respectable number 8, although once he was 6. So when you consider the number of people we've had in the Oval Office, that's a very distinguished record, so to speak. However, John F. Kennedy wasn't always that popular, so he just barely won the 1960 presidential election. In my opinion, this is one of the most studied and talked about elections in American history, just because of the interesting dynamics and how close it was. And John F. Kennedy won the states of Illinois and Texas by a combined 55,000 votes. Had he not won both of those states, Nixon would have been elected president. And so you think, well, 55,000 divided by 2, if 27,500 people in Texas and Illinois would have voted for Nixon, he would have won the 1960 presidential election, just to show you how close that was. And then John F. Kennedy, when he goes into the White House, he's very popular. This is his presidential approval rating. You can see, and it's funny because in recent times, no president has gotten anywhere near this kind of approval rating. We're so divided as a nation now, on all sides, that people really can't look past their political preferences. I mean, it's been a long time since anyone was in the 70s for president's approval. President Kennedy was. But you can see his low point was right around the time he was assassinated. So there was a lot of frustration with him and his administration. And so, yeah, he's popular now. He was popular when he first went into the White House, but when he goes down to Dallas, he's at a low point in his popularity, and he's starting to crank up the 1964 reelection campaign. And remember, Texas is a really key state. If he had lost that, he would have lost the election. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go down there and try and shore up support, so to speak. And so his team decides that it would be good for him to make a trip down there in the year before the election of 1964. Now, President Kennedy travels with his wife, Jackie, and that was a big PR move for him whenever she accompanied him. She would draw a huge amount of press coverage, and people would come out and just kind of a lot of buzz so to speak, wherever she went, either by herself or with President Kennedy. So it's really kind of interesting just to look at these photos of them and the cameras and the videos and the people coming out to take a look at them. It was really kind of like movie star esque, so to speak. Now, we mentioned this briefly before. A lot of people don't realize that when President Kennedy was killed, Jackie was still mourning the death of her son. So she gave birth to baby Patrick, and he only ended up living for 39 hours. And he ended up dying on August 9th, 1963. And again, President Kennedy's killed on November 22nd. So this event, quite a few people know about it, but it's kind of been like forgotten about because it's really been overshadowed by the death of President Kennedy. So I mean, imagine this, in a 15-week span, she lost her son, Patrick, who had been alive for 39 hours, but then she also lost her husband. So the fact that she was able to kind of continue on and endure after the death of her husband, really, really incredible. And so the Texas trip is really kind of the unofficial kickoff to the 1964 reelection campaign. Oh, and then I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, Jackie really had a lot of health issues after this. She was hospitalized for several days. And in the 15 weeks after her son died, she was kind of a recluse. She pretty much just stayed inside the White House. And I'm not faulting her or blaming her in any way, but she was having a lot of physical health problems after that. And so she really hadn't been out all that much in public. But when President Kennedy's going down to Texas, she's going to come along. And so it's kind of like her emergence on the public stage. And that's really adds an interesting dynamic. I mean, think how differently this event would have been portrayed or remembered if President Kennedy, say, had been traveling by himself. It would have been a very different type of event, so to speak. Let's see. And then I always thought this was an interesting set of photos. So obviously, President and Mrs. Kennedy, they're living in the White House. What did they do on their last night together in the White House? Well, they had a little like mini get together where it was the indoor White House Christmas tree was unveiled, not the famous outdoor tree that people go and see, the public, but an indoor tree. And they had a small kind of reception for friends and family members. And so they ended up posing in front of the tree. So this is Wednesday, November 20th. And about 39 hours later, he would be shot and killed. So, kind of an interesting set of photos of them standing in front of the tree. And then, after the reception was over and they posed for this photo, they went up to the private quarters of the White House and they started the tenuous process of signing all their Christmas cards. So, remember back in the day when people used to actually send Christmas cards in the mail? Well, if you're the president and the first lady, you have to send thousands of them, and they're going to sign all these. So, Wednesday, November 20th was them starting the process of signing all these cards. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they signed about 100 of them before they retired for the evening. And then the next morning, they begin their trip to Texas. And it was a 3-day trip. They're going to fly from Washington, D.C. to San Antonio on Thursday morning. Thursday, there's going to be a whirlwind trip to San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth. Friday, they're going to spend the night in Fort Worth, then go to Dallas, and then on to Austin, and then the Lyndon Johnson Ranch. They're going to spend the day Saturday there, and then fly home Saturday evening. So a whirlwind trip. And I think maybe some people, even in Texas, might not realize that the Kennedys were in San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth before they went to Dallas. It wasn't like they just flew from DC to Dallas. Interesting in that regard. So again, a real whirlwind trip. He's going to fly along with his wife to San Antonio. Then they're going to fly to Houston. Oops. Then they're going to fly up to Fort Worth, then to Dallas. And if he hadn't been assassinated, he was going to continue on to Austin, and then he was going to go to a barbecue at the Lyndon Johnson Ranch and spend the night there before flying home to Washington, D.C. So that was the plan. And let's see, we'll talk about them departing Washington, D.C. in just a moment. But before we do that, Joanne, Patty, Brad, any thoughts on the upcoming trip?
Well, yeah, I got there's a lovely coffee table book from the Dallas Museum of Art. It's called Hotel Texas, an art exhibit. art exhibition for the president and Mrs. John F. Kennedy. That's the way they talked in 1963. And yeah, they stayed in the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth, and they surprised the Kennedys by having a lot of beautiful art from all the art museums in Texas. And they didn't exhibit. They got all those paintings, from the Kimball and all the museums in the area, and they did an exhibition of that. Like during one of the big anniversaries of Kennedy's death here. So no, I'm very fortunate to have this coffee table book.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you mentioning that because, yeah, that's like a really big deal in the Dallas Fort Worth area
Mhm.
that the people rallied together to solicit these well-known paintings by like Monet and Van Gogh and stuff from
Right.
private
And
collections to be on display in their hotel suite.
yeah, and they didn't do it just because they know Jackie, loved the arts. They wanted to show the world that Dallas and Fort Worth are not just cow towns. At that time in the '60s, yeah, a lot of Texans, they were very eager to show the world that we're sophisticated, even though we have the accents, and we can talk art and science just as well as anybody else.
Culture and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, thanks. A great point. Thanks, Joanne. Appreciate that. What about Patty? Brad, any other thoughts?
No, but thank you for contributing that. Yeah, I get what you're talking about.
That's
And I just want to say also about that Jackie film, which I like a lot. I think what they were trying to do was get under the lid of Jackie's elegance and poise, and show all the torment she was going through, because she really went through a lot. Of course, with the death of their son and then the assassination. I mean, it was really quite traumatic, and she had suicidal thoughts, and that's what I thought. I thought Natalie Portman was trying to, you know, get beyond the lid, especially with her, constant smoking.
Yeah, it was the director talked about he wanted to be a psychological profile, not necessarily a historical profile. What
But the
about you,
constant
Brad?
smoking
Oh,
made me think about the premature birth and the death of the baby. Yes, we hadn't known about that when that was happening. Now they understand how horrific smoking is for pregnancies.
oh, yeah, and then I've also read doctors have said if their child was born now, he would have survived. Back at this point in
Exactly.
time, he
Yeah.
um, they didn't have the technology and the knowledge to save him. So that's an unfortunate event as well. What about you, Brad? Any thoughts before we continue on?
well. I think I'm ready to continue on. I think it was a wonderful trip. It was a very conclusive political trip. Some of the other books and things have suggested that there was a lot of infighting between Johnson and Governor Connolly and some of the others, but and I guess this show of unity was going to try to draw them all together.
Oh yeah, that is kind of one of the myths. I'm not saying that that didn't exist, but yeah, hold your people should hold their opinion on that for a moment until we go a little bit further. So, if you're not familiar with Washington D.C., how the president usually travels is they usually take the helicopter from the White House to Andrews Air Force Base, which is in Maryland, and then they fly off on the jet plane to wherever they have to go. So that's what the Kennedys did. They took off from Andrews Air Force Base early Thursday morning, and here they are. I thought I'd include a lot of photos. For whatever reason, I've always enjoyed looking at these historical pictures just to kind of get a different perspective on things. So here's Jacqueline and John F. Kennedy. They're getting off the helicopter, Marine One, which is over here, and they're heading towards Air Force One to head off to Dallas. And they're really going to have a long day. They left Dallas early in the morning and they got into Fort Worth, I think I'm not mistaken, around midnight. And they were doing all these public events. So, really long day. Notice John F. Kennedy's got a hat in his hand, which is interesting because he didn't wear a lot of hats.
And yeah, when they got into Fort Worth and went to their suite, the Hotel Texas, they were just delighted to see all these beautiful paintings. And yeah, Jackie and Jack, they really enjoyed all the artwork.
Yeah, and really like the last artwork they saw. Um,
Yeah, that makes it all the more poignant.
And then, okay, so they arrive in San Antonio, Texas, the Alamo City, and here's the car at the airport. So they fly the car in a separate plane. You can see all the people gathered at the airport. I've flown in and out of San Antonio airport many, many times. And okay, here they are coming off the plane. Jackie looking very well dressed as always. Her husband, he's still holding his hat. They're walking hand in hand down the stairs. And so you see these pictures, not a lot, but sometimes in different media contexts. I think it's interesting is because the Texas trip, Jackie's known for her pink Chanel suit, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But here she's wearing a different outfit. And President Kennedy is all smiles as well. And again, he was used to traveling on his own because Jackie had been, even before Patrick's birth, she was pregnant. And so her travel was really limited beforehand as well. So this is really the first time in many months that they've gone out on a public trip like this.
This is a good photo, though. If you look at behind Jackie, all of those guys are older guys, and it
Oh, yeah.
really, other than the FBI guys who tended to be, a little younger, but the Secret Service guys, I should say. But yeah, that was always set off because he was always among people that looked a lot older too.
Hmm. Good point, Patty. Appreciate that. And notice
And
they're
yeah,
all smiles.
and look at those gloves that Jackie's wearing.
Yeah,
Uh,
you don't see those anymore.
mhm.
Very
And
classy.
And even
yeah,
President Kennedy, I mean, he just looks so comfortable. I mean, I have to wear a suit once in a while, and I'm always like, oh God, it looks very comfortable. Maybe because I haven't worn it as often as he did. I don't know, or maybe because I don't look as good in my suit as he looked in it. But anyway, yeah, just really interesting pictures because it's kind of like I said, a somber. The whole trip because of the assassination very somber. But when you look at these photos, from earlier in the day, it's everyone's all smiles and the sun is shining and all that kind of stuff. So really interesting.
yeah. And I just want to make it very clear that I have no illusions about the marriage of Jack and Jackie, or all the things that the Kennedys did.
Hmm.
No, I see some comments. I always thought that Jackie was a long-suffering wife. She just looks nervous as of trying to please. Believe me, this was the Mad Men era, and so yeah, I have no illusions.
Oh yeah. No, I get that. I get where people could say that, but on the other hand, I mean, look at the pictures, not just these, but the ones in the future. I mean, she's smiling from ear to ear, and yeah, you can fake that, but I don't know. I kind of think maybe that's there's some truth to that, but maybe not as extreme as some people might think. But that's just my opinion.
If you
Hey,
read
and you've got the Boy
contemporary
Scout
accounts,
coming out. What's that?
if you read contemporary accounts, even Khrushchev, who was not particularly like suave, was totally charmed by Jacqueline Kennedy. I mean, people who were contemporary were charmed by her,
Oh
and
yeah, De Gaulle.
yeah,
He was the
it's
friendliest
quite
guy
yeah,
either.
Duvall, who was notably frosty and egotistical. Yeah, contempt. I don't know. It almost feels like a sort of revisionist thing going on, like to try to denigrate. And one thing I will say is that this assassination really spawned the whole cottage industry of conspiracy theory, even long before computers. And
Hmm.
I sometimes wonder if part of the yes, it was a very interesting and complicated relationship, marriage, whatever you want to call it. But I cannot overemphasize how much young families, which the United States was pretty much overwhelmed by young families then. These were the baby boom generation. And they were just immensely popular among younger families. I don't know another way to say it. I can't remember a lot of people having negative things to say, and I do remember almost everybody that I knew having a picture of JFK in their house.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, like when I see this photo, I don't know. Do you think she's faking that smile? It doesn't look like it to me. I mean, it could be
Well,
mistaken.
here's another thing. Um, my family was Catholic, of Irish Italian lineage, and really to have a Catholic president, I mean that was a big step forward in that
yeah,
time.
and a lot of Catholics had Pope John the 23rd, excuse me, and JFK, almost side
Hmm.
by side.
Hmm.
And
Well,
somebody mentioned a famous quote. No, he said, "I'm the guy who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris."
right,
Hmm.
and I enjoyed it very much. And
Exactly.
well, another thing is, the Irish immigrants were despised, all immigrants, have struggles, but the ones from Ireland had tremendous struggles. So yeah, to have someone of Irish descent get into the White House, I mean, that was a big step forward.
Oh yeah, I mean it wasn't that long earlier where there was a huge amount of discrimination against the Irish. You've seen those signs, Irish need not apply.
No Irish need apply, right?
Yeah, and I was actually on a tour. I couldn't believe this, but someone said the Kennedys were Boston Blue Bloods, and I I immediately said no. If you were an Irish Catholic in Boston, no matter how wealthy you were not a blue blood.
No way.
No way.
Yeah, you could have a lot of money and still be an outsider.
Yes, in those country clubs, if you were Jewish, if you're Catholic, if you had certain ethnic backgrounds, Irish, Italian, they just didn't want you in there. And then, of course, if you were African American, Asian American, oh, it was an absolute no, no, no.
All right, let's continue on. So then they took a motorcade through the streets of San Antonio. And one of the things that I frequently hear people say when we're talking about the assassination, oh God, why did he drive around in that motorcade with the top down? That was really unsafe. Well, that's really kind of like a modern perspective on things because back then that was a common thing to do. People did it all the time, including him. So just I'll give you some examples. So here he is riding through the streets of San Antonio in the presidential limousine, and if you're familiar with San Antonio, this is actually right off of Broadway Street in Alamo Heights. If you want to go check this out, I love the guy standing on the back of his truck, photobombing this. And this was in front of a school. And so the children lined the sides of the street and were waving to the motorcade. And then they put up a historical marker here a few years ago. So again, this is in San Antonio. It's on Broadway. It's like if you're familiar with San Antonio, it's north of Central Market. If you know where that is, actually by like I don't know a mile or two, not very far away. And then this is cool when they put up the historical marker. This guy, he was a child at this school, and he's pointing out to his family where he is in the photo. So that's really neat. So you can go check that out if you're in San Antonio. And again, I bet if you surveyed people in San Antonio, a lot of them would not know that President Kennedy visited there, just like the same thing in Houston and Fort Worth. They actually published the motorcade route in the paper. They did the same thing in Dallas, which a lot of people find shocking, but it wasn't you know, wasn't an uncommon thing to do. I mean, they wanted people to come out and see them. That was, part of the deal. Here's San Antonio International Airport. So they took a motorcade from here down to here, and they were going to Brooks Air Force Base, where a aerospace medical center was being dedicated, and President Kennedy was going to speak there. Then they took the motorcade on another quick trip, and he flew out of Kelly Air Force Base. Reason he flew out of one and spoke at a different one is just again chance to interact with the people. And again, here's that photo, famous photo of his time in San Antonio. And they're cruising around the streets of San Antonio. That's downtown San Antonio, if you don't recognize it. The Alamo City, home of the San Antonio Spurs. And they look at the motorcade. So now this doesn't have President. This is the follow up. This is like the rear of the motorcade. The president, this limousine is up front. But I mean, you can look at this. If somebody wanted to do something, it would be pretty easy just to walk out onto the street or pop out of one of these windows. So I'm just kind of showing you again to kind of give you the context. The trip to Dallas in the motorcade, that was not an unusual thing, and it wasn't just Kennedy. Other presidents, especially Eisenhower, had done a lot of things like this before as well. So it was just kind of a different era. I mean, look at all these people, sticking out of the upstairs balcony, cruising through the streets. And, here he is right here. And here's Jackie and the Secret Service right behind him. And then look at all this big giant motorcade of press and Secret Service and buses and etc. And here they are cruising through downtown. And then, okay, so then they get to the Air Force Base, and President Kennedy is going to deliver a short speech. You can actually find it on YouTube if you're interested in listening to it. And here's Lyndon Johnson, who in about 24 hours is going to be president with Jackie. It's funny in this picture, it looks like he's holding his iPhone, doesn't it?
Yes, it
With the,
does.
the light blue cover. Hey, Jackie, let's take a selfie. I'll text it to you. I'll tag you.
Oh,
Let's see. And here's the two of them. She looks so happy. He looks so happy. Everyone looks happy. And again, this is kind of the myth is he went down there and everyone hated him and there was a lot of division. I'm not saying there wasn't some of that, but there was also a lot of happiness and joy and stuff as well. So it's not all one or the other usually in historical situations. Let's see. So then he ends up giving this speech, dedication speech again to the Brooks Aerospace Medical Division. It was a nice speech. Um,
Lady
I'll
Bird
play
was.
Yeah, I'll play a clip from the speech a little bit later. Then they get in the car and they drive through the motorcade onto the next Air Force base. I don't have any pictures of that particular leg of the trip, but here they are showing up. And then, okay, so here's the press coverage the next day. Thousands give JFK rousing San Antonio welcome. And there's pictures of him with this big crowd of people. So that looks like a successful trip or visit. Let's see. And then, okay, up in Dallas, where he's going to be the next day, what were they saying about the San Antonio visit? Plea for space plan kicks off JFK tour. President denies economic drain. Such as, ironically enough, Richard Nixon was in Dallas right before President Kennedy. And then later on the day, they end up going to Houston. And again, this is kind of another forgotten part of the story. So here they are landing on Air Force One, departing the plane. You can tell the Houston pictures because it's a little bit later in the day. So you can see the sun is going down, has a little different type of coloring, so to speak. And then here they are departing the plane with the entourage, so to speak, and being greeted by dignitaries. They're still wearing their same outfits. Now, notice Jackie gets yellow roses. Yellow roses are one of the flowers of Texas. And in Dallas, she got red roses, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. And again, looking very happy. The handshaking, the gloves, the sun coming down or going down.
Yeah, I just have I'm reading some of the comments, and they said that some people say JFK was not the first American president of Irish ancestry, although he was definitely the first Catholic one. Yeah, I think there are some presidents whose ancestors came from Northern Ireland. They're called Scots Irish, Irish Protestant, and yeah, it just shows the complexity of
But
Irish
he
history.
was wasn't he 100% Irish or at least 50% Irish? I mean, yeah, I
It was,
think there
yeah,
was
it was 100 proof.
there were some people that had Irish ancestry, but not to the extent that he did.
And they were Irish on both sides. He was
Yeah, it
the
was,
yeah, his
uh,
mother as well as
but
his father.
his
but
mother
I
was
think yeah, the
a
thing is, I
political
think
dynasty. Well, Honey Fitzgerald
yes,
was mayor of Boston, so
yeah,
she
and,
had.
Okay.
Go
but
ahead.
no, I think there were some presidents before whose ancestors came from Northern Ireland, and that was the heavily Protestant and just culturally different from Southern Ireland. Again, every ethnic group has its complexities.
Part of what changed it was the potato famine when
Oh,
modern
yes,
Irish people emigrated into the United States. So yeah, that was part of it. It changed. The older people had some Irish roots, but again, that was when all the white people in America were immigrants. Okay, even around the time of
right,
the
yes,
Revolution, that was still. So yes, it was a different timing, it wasn't just about the Irishness, it was about the Irish roots that were very political, because one of the ways the Irish worked their way into American life was through political activity. Tim,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
Andrew Jackson. Yeah, he was of Irish ancestry. Of course, they always told me Scots Irish, and yes, it's the Republic of Ireland, not Southern Ireland.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's continue on. We're getting kind of sidetracked on Irish
Right.
ancestry. All good. No, I appreciate that, but let's continue on because we have a lot of other stuff to cover. I don't want to go off too much of a tangent on that. So again, big crowd in Houston turns out to see President and Mrs. Kennedy. And yeah, look at all these people and waving and taking pictures and all this stuff. So they got huge crowds everywhere they ended up going. This is a really cute photo. Look at the expression on President Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy's faces. I was like, wow, look at all these people coming out to see us.
Yeah, she has an almost coquettish expression on her face.
What kind of expression, Patty?
Coquettish, like like delighted, she's interacting with the crowd. She looks delighted, not just
Hmm.
happy. She looks delighted.
Hmm. Oh yeah, well he looks happy too,
Yes.
so that's nice. And again, they're traveling together, so I'm sure that was nice for him. And then again, these pictures are interesting also just because, like I said, the sun is going down, the lighting is very different than the San Antonio one. So when I look at pictures of them myself, I can immediately tell if it's at the San Antonio airport or the Houston airport just because of the position of the sun. And then, oh, okay, so here they are traveling through the motorcade again through the city of Houston. Same thing. They put the route in the paper. There's all these people lining the streets. If you've ever driven in Houston, and you've seen the horrific traffic, well, that's not something new. That's been going on for quite a while. Houston's known for having some challenging traffic situations. But hey, if you're in the presidential motorcade, they close the streets in that direction. You don't have to deal with that. And then here it is. So I always think this is cool when someone takes a. This isn't my photo or my hand, but people take historical photos and they superimpose them over the way things look now. And so here's the motorcade cruising through downtown Houston. And look at all these people lining the street. So again, same thing. Someone could have easily just had a gun in their pocket or their coat and walked up to his car and shot him at pretty much point blank range. It was just a different era back then. You would not do anything like this now, but back then, because you think about it, nothing had really happened like this before, at least not in a motorcade type situation. Let's see. And then Jackie gave this really cool speech in Spanish. Of course, Texas has a large Hispanic and Latino population, a lot of Spanish speakers. I'm not going to play it, but if you're interested, you can check it out on YouTube. Jackie spoke several languages, so really neat that she gave her speech in Spanish. And then here they are greeting the crowd with some Spanish musicians in the background. And his speech kind of centered on economics. And then, like I said, she gave her speech as well. And they get on the plane in Houston and they're off to Fort Worth. So, wow, it's been a really long day. It's not even over with yet. They land in Fort Worth really late Thursday evening and they head out Friday morning. And um, I used to I used to give tours in Fort Worth. I've kind of had to put them on hiatus because I've been so busy at work. But I can't tell you how many people that I've met. Oh, I didn't know the Kennedys had come to Fort Worth. Yeah, not only did they come, they were there the night before the assassination. This is what Joanne was referring to earlier. They stayed at a place called the Hotel Texas, which at the time was the fanciest, most well-known hotel in Fort Worth. It was kind of like the equivalent, like I don't know, the Willard in Washington D.C. or the I don't know, the Astoria in the Waldorf Astoria in New York or something like that, or the Driscoll in Austin, one of those kind of like old money type of places. And then here's a postcard of it from back in the day. And the Kennedys stayed in suite 1530, which is the presidential suite. You can actually still stay there. So if you want to go visit the hotel, and you can request the presidential suite. Now, it's going to cost you a little bit of money because it's very nice. Appointed. I'm kind of bummed out. I've never actually really seen any good photos of the art that was on display there. This is what the room looks like now. And sorry, this photo is actually even a little bit blurry. And then this is their bedroom. So this was the suite that they stayed in. But Joanne, when you saw the exhibition or the book, are there any good photos of the art hanging up on the walls? Because I've seen a couple, but they were like really blurry, and it wasn't really. It's kind of hard to look at the art from the photos that I saw. But what about your book and what you did?
I think the book is very good. And I went to the exhibit itself and I was very impressed.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So yeah, this is where the Kennedys spent essentially their last night together, because this is Thursday evening and he was shot and killed on Friday. So they spend their last night together as a married couple, husband and wife, President and First Lady in Fort Worth, Texas. And here's another image of the hotel. Again, it's in downtown Fort Worth. And so here's the entrance. It's configured a little bit differently now. This parking lot has been changed. But what happened was they checked into the hotel really late at night, so it was a super long day for them. And then the next morning, it was raining out, but miraculously enough, a ton of people gathered outside of the hotel to get a chance to see President and or Mrs. Kennedy. And so President Kennedy was not planning on going outside to meet the people or talk to them or do anything. But his staff had told him, like, man, there's like a couple thousand people outside. And in the rain too, it was drizzling. And so it was decided, like, hey, maybe he should go out there and make a few comments. Fort Worth, interestingly enough, is known as where the West begins. And so President Kennedy does that. He actually goes outside and greets all these people that had been standing in the drizzle, hoping to see him and or his wife. And so he gives this impromptu speech. It's the next to last speech that he ever gave. It was an impromptu thing. You can also find versions of this on YouTube. I'd love to play all these different speeches for you that he gave during this trip, but the program would end up being way too long. But if you're interested, you can go check it out on the internet. There he is with Governor Conley of Texas and Vice President Johnson, who, of course, also was from Texas. And yeah, look at all these people standing out in the drizzle. You can see people with their umbrellas and their raincoats on. Now, the rain had just stopped, and so it was kind of like a opening of clear weather. He ends up going out there, and then wow, look at this mass of people. And again, same thing. Someone could have easily, if they wanted to do him harm, done so in this particular spot, but no one did. Everyone was very well behaved. And if you go to Fort Worth, you can actually visit the site where President Kennedy gave this speech. They've turned it into a memorial to President Kennedy. They have the text of his speech here, this nice statue of him here. There's a photo. You can't see it, it's partially obscured, but it's Jackie and President Kennedy. And then here he's giving the speech, and then all the crowd and all this kind of stuff. So this is right in downtown Fort Worth. If you want to go check this out, the hotel is now the Hilton. And there's some more pictures of the memorial. And I used to lead these tours at downtown Fort Worth. Again, I apologize I've had to take a break, but I can't tell you. It's like seems like half the people on the tour have no idea this was here or knew that he gave the speech. But hey, that's no big deal. That's one reason why we do these tours is so people can learn about their history. I'll let you read that historical marker again. Just really fascinating that they spent their last night together in Fort Worth, and like Joanne said about the artwork and all that kind of stuff. So now, the reason why he was in Fort Worth, he was giving a speech the next morning at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. So this was like the official event. The speech that he gave outside was an impromptu type of thing. And this is the last speech that President Kennedy gave. And here's how he ended up concluding the speech. And again, this is another speech that you can find on the internet. I am confident as I look to the future that our chances for security, our chances for peace are better than they have been in the past. And the reason is because we are stronger. And with that, strength is a determination to not only maintain the peace, but also the vital interests of the United States. To that great cause, Texas and the United States are committed. Thank you. One reason why he went to Fort Worth, it's traditionally had a big defense industry in Fort Worth. And so he was kind of coming to talk about American military strength and the diplomatic advantages of being, let's say, negotiating from a position of strength. So that was the purpose of the speech. But again, delivering the speech at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, you can see Jackie sitting over here, Lyndon Johnson next door.
Just to just an aside, this is taking place 1 year and 1 month after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if anybody remembers, when you were showing the graphs of his popularity, that really you could see a huge dip and then a big rise, and that was occurring right near the like end toward the end of '62. That was regarding the missile crisis, actually.
Oh, thanks, Patty. I really appreciate you mentioning that because, yeah, I forgot to. Let me go back to that. Ta da! Here you are.
Yep. See how you get that slope down, and then all of a sudden
Hmm.
that big rise up. Yeah.
Yeah, great point, Patty. I appreciate you mentioning that. Thank you. That's why I love having you and Brad, and then also tonight Joanne here, chime in with things I didn't know or forgot to mention. Let's see. Going back to Fort Worth. Oh, is someone going to say something?
No, I just want to say about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Remember the TV series Mad Men? They did a great episode about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how people reacted. It was quite an eye opener.
I remember that episode. A lot of great episodes in Mad Men, but I
Mhm.
particularly remember that one. Let's see. So yeah, here's Jackie and Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson over here. And then here they are departing the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth. We'll talk about
Again,
her.
question about the graph. No, the slump was leading up into the crisis in the early part of the crisis. The jump was after the crisis was over.
Mhm.
Somebody misunderstood that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the approval rating too went down. I mean, when someone goes into the White House, they talk about the honeymoon period where usually their approval ratings are a little bit higher as people kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt or, optimistic about the future, then, continue on and maybe it goes down. That's pretty much true for most presidents. Again, welcome to Fort Worth, Texas. There's a W missing here, but where the West begins, here's Jackie coming out with her pink Chanel suit and President Kennedy following behind her. And okay, now we're going to cruise through the streets of Fort Worth. And wow, look at all these people. This is downtown Fort Worth, Texas. And same thing. So another huge crowd of people. And again, I think maybe these pictures might, we were talking before about, the assassination fact versus fiction. And oh, yeah, there was all this division and people hated him and stuff. Yeah, they did to a certain degree, but not everybody thought that way. Look at all these people out here. So this is a really cool photo, seeing him walking through downtown Fort Worth. Oh, so we've been recording this. All right, so we were talking about the fact that this was a 3-day trip. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, maybe if you're not familiar with North Texas, they were in Fort Worth and they actually flew to Dallas. They flew from Fort Worth to Dallas, which not many people do. And we're like, well, why would they do that? It's not very far away. Well, the one thing, the traffic can be bad. Number two, they were actually leaving there and going to Austin. So if they would have driven from Fort Worth to Dallas, which is only like a 10-minute flight, they would have had to turn around and drive all the way back to Fort Worth to fly out from there. So when they landed in Fort Worth, the plane was there, but then after he gave that speech to the Chamber of Commerce, they ended up flying to Dallas and they land at Love Field. So they didn't drive from Fort Worth to Dallas. They ended up driving. And here he is departing Fort Worth, waving goodbye to the crowd. And then he arrives in Dallas. And so here's a timeline. The timeline, it'll extend on to the bottom of the page. I'll show that at a little bit later. If you wanted to take like a picture of it, a screenshot, you're more than welcome to, but you might want to wait till I actually show the whole entire thing. So 11:38 a.m. Air Force One lands at Love Field in Dallas. They were stayed there for about 14 minutes, and then the motorcade left Love Field, which is it's the original airport in Dallas. Now they also have Dallas Fort Worth Airport. And then at 12:30, President Kennedy was shot. So he was only in Dallas for a short time, less than an hour from the time the plane landed until he was shot. And there are some protesters here, just like there were in other places that the president visited throughout his administration, but there's also a lot of supporters. You can see this big crowd of people. And again, maybe a little bit dispelling the myth that everyone was very hostile and he was going into enemy territory, so to speak. Um, Here's the Dallas Morning News. The morning of the assassination, storm of political controversy swirls around Kennedy on visit. I do see that, but I also think maybe this is the media kind of stirring up a little bit of stuff. Yarborough snubs LBJ, and then if you look down here closely, here's the motorcade route, which we had seen that before. So this is how Oswald finds out where Kennedy's going, and they are. And there's that motorcade route, front page of the paper. And again, they're doing the motorcade because they want people to come out. So it's not like it was a secret where he was going. Uh, that was part of the problem. But yeah, there were some people that were not happy with President Kennedy. There's never been any president ever, and probably never will be, that doesn't have people that are against them. That's just the way it goes. As he used to say at church, even Jesus had his detractors. So they were distributing these wanted posters, and people were protesting and stuff. So yeah, there was some of that as well. I don't want to diminish that, make it seem like everyone there loved him. That wasn't the case either. And here they are departing the plane. This is one of the more famous photos of the Dallas trip, and it's a bright sunny day. Now, remember earlier it was drizzling in Fort Worth. And if that weather had stayed that way, he wouldn't have been driving around in the convertible. So that's kind of an interesting what if. It was also really warm this day. I forget what year it was. I think it was 2 years ago. I gave the tour, the in-person tour of the Kennedy assassination in downtown Dallas, and holy cow, it was freezing out. It was like, I don't
Yeah.
know, 40 degrees, and it was like super windy. And we were talking about that, like, man, if they would have had weather like this the day
Yeah.
President Kennedy was in Dallas, he would have lived. But they wouldn't
They
have been
would
driving around in the convertible.
have
So,
on
but it was
the
Yeah,
time.
particularly
this is
warm this day. What's that, Brad and Joanne?
They would have
it,
put the bubble top on top of the car.
Yeah. Hmm.
it's typical Texas weather, except in the summertime.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
can really vary a lot
Very
too.
volatile. I mean, one day is summery, the next day we're in snowmageddon.
Well, yeah, it was funny because that was in 2023. I think it was really cold. And the next year, it was the exact opposite. It was like
Oh
incredibly
no.
hot. And we're
Yeah.
walking around, and people were like, "Oh my God, how much further do we have to walk? It's like 95 degrees out." So you just
Yeah.
never know in Texas. But anyway, a famous photo of the two of them departing Air Force One. And then, okay, here she is. She's the woman standing there with the yellow flowers. Then this woman has red roses. So what happened was there was so much kind of euphoria of the Kennedys coming
Mhm.
to North Texas. They florists ran out of the yellow flowers, and so they were, scouring the metro area looking for yellow roses, but they actually ran out, and so they wanted to give her some things like, well, we'll give her these red roses instead, better than nothing. But kind of an ironic moment, and Jackie later on would talk about that. But here she is holding the red roses, so kind of an ironic twist of fate. Again, really nice weather, very contrast with the morning in Fort Worth when it was raining when he came out of the hotel for the speech. And then here's a quote from Jackie a little bit later on in an interview she gave. Speaking about her trip to Texas and the flowers, every time we got off the plane that day, 3 times, she's actually referring to the previous day as well, though. 3 times they gave me the yellow roses of Texas. So San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth. But in Dallas, they gave me red roses. I thought, how funny, red roses. So all the seat was full of blood and red roses, meaning after the assassination. So kind of an ironic twist of fate there. And then the pink Chanel suit, which is super famous. Made of wool, the double breasted raspberry pink and navy trim collared suit was matched with the trademark matching pink pillbox hat and white gloves. In the early 1960s, the Chanel suit was a wardrobe staple of the upwardly mobile American female. It evoked a powerful image of sophisticated, intelligent, and independent modern woman and could fit almost every daytime occasion that required a woman to dress stylishly. Given that the Chanel suit was a strong statement of an independent woman, it is balanced by the color pink, which has an element of traditional femininity. So it's kind of interesting the contrast between those two different ideas. And you know what? Before I started studying the assassination, I didn't really know all the historical context of this suit, but really interesting. Most of the American public viewing pictures of the presidential couple on television and even in newspapers and magazines, would not have known the color of the pink suit, given that at the time, TV news and newspapers were predominantly in black and white. The color of the suit did not become widely known until the publication of color photos in Life magazine's JFK Memorial issue, November 29th, 1963. So 7 days after. So that's an interesting tidbit as well. Eventually, the suit, which was never cleaned, was given to the National Archives. It will not be seen by the public until at least 2103. That's kind of a whole other tangent story about family and privacy and all that stuff. But you think about it, can you think of any more iconic clothing item in American history? I don't know. So anyway, that's the pink Chanel suit. Patty, Brad, Joanne, any thoughts on the suit or anything related to the arrival in Dallas?
One of the reasons that the style was such a sensation is that it's the top, the jacket sort of ends at the waist. And if you think
Mhm.
of a traditional suit jacket, it would be more like a man's suit jacket, which would have the lapels and the thing coming down to hip level. So
Oh,
that was
let's Oh, I was going to say, let me show you some pictures now. Let's come back to that. So this wasn't the first time that Jackie had worn that suit. Here she is at a public event where they were announcing the renovation of Lafayette Square, which is across the street from White House, which is also a very interesting event, but we don't have time to get on that. But yeah, here's the suit. So Patty wanted to show the pictures that you were referring to. And then here's like a fashion magazine that has a model wearing the same suit. Now, unfortunately, it's not colored. So now repeat that again, Patty, about the jacket.
Well, instead of a traditional suit jacket, and you actually see them more often now, it would come down to below like the hip, and curve away, whereas the
Like the men's
Chanel
do.
ended on a straight line, right, just maybe slightly below the waist. But so it implied that feminine shape underneath that boxy looking suit. It's an interesting. It's almost like a trompe um, effect, because it makes you see the feminine shape even as you're looking at something that is actually very boxy. It's hard to explain unless you put it next to a traditional, suit, skirt, and jacket.
Oh, okay, well, thanks. I'll have to do that for next time. What
Um,
about Joanne? Brad,
well,
any
yeah,
other thoughts?
I heard. Don't quote me on this, but I actually heard that was that suit was not actually designed by Chanel. It was an imitation of a Chanel suit.
Oh, okay.
Right,
Now,
but
like I
that's
said,
not
don't.
what it's called a
Yeah,
Chanel Chanel
yeah,
Coco
Okay.
don't.
Chanel Cuban suit.
But Chanel, no, of course, Chanel, that great fashion designer, she had her complications, but when she designed and marketed the suits in France, they were considered rather dated, but they were very, very popular in America.
Yeah, and of course, Jackie likes all things French. She,
Yes, mhm.
she was a French literature major in college and spoke French and was familiar with, and had gone to school actually in Paris for several months when she was in
Right.
college. So
Take a
pretty
tour
familiar
in
French.
Paris. You can take a tour of the apartment where she lived.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Let's see. All right. Anything else on the arrival to Dallas? All right. Well, let's continue on. So again, she had worn the pink suit before. I think, if I'm not mistaken, she wore it 2 or 3 or 4 times. This wasn't this Lafayette Square thing wasn't the only time she'd worn it before. So that's interesting in itself. And then some great photos. So yeah, all the people coming out to the airport. Again, this is Dallas Love Field. I actually have not flown out of Dallas Fort or Dallas Love Field in a long, long time, and I'm not sure if they have like a historical marker there signifying the events that took place. Maybe someone that might be familiar with the airport can let me know in the chat if that's actually something that they do or not. I forgot to look that up. And again, all smiles. And this is less than an hour before he's going to be shot and killed, just to give you that context. And then Yeah, big mass of people, so it's hard to see the Kennedys in this big crowd. There's a fence here, and so what's happened is they've come over to shake hands of all the people in this fence. So here's President Kennedy, the blue arrow. Here's Jackie with the pink arrow and the flower. And of course, you got to have a Confederate flag. It's Texas, along with the Texas flag, which, as a non-Texan that moved here, I think it's interesting how often you see the Texas state flag around the state. In my opinion, you see it. You see the Texas state flag more than any other state flag in the U.S.
Jan is just answering your question. Let's see. Jan Paulson is
Oh,
saying,
good. Yes, there is a
yes,
marker at
there's a
Love Field.
marker. Okay. That
Oh,
commemorates
that's
where
great.
Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president after JFK's assassination, but no marker for JFK himself at the field. Interesting.
Oh, no, that is interesting. Well, thanks, Jan. I appreciate that. I almost feel like I should book a flight out of Love Field just so I can go check it out and research it. Again, here's all the media and the people coming out to see them, and the handshakes and all that stuff. And then this is where he was headed to. So he was going to the Dallas Trade Mart to deliver a speech. Look at all those cool cars in the parking lot. This is actually a photo not from the day of the assassination, but just a historical photo. But this was the destination in Dallas. He's flying in there to give this speech at the Dallas Trade Mart. It was an economic type speech, and he's taking this motorcade from Love Field to the Trade Mart. And then this is the Trade Mart. They set this up anticipation of the Kennedys' arrival. And this was a big event. I can't remember off the top of my head how many people were attending this, but it was a lot. This is a really big building, and it can hold a lot of people. And so there was many people that were going to be listening to him speak. And of course, Dallas, um, even back then, was a big city.
And most of them were there at the time all the events of the assassination happened. This is where they learned about what was going on.
Oh yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Patty, because I forgot to include that. Yeah, I mean that figure. He was shot just minutes before he was supposed to show up at the this venue, so the people are already there, waiting for him to arrive when the news shows up. And then after the trademark speech, what was supposed to happen? He was supposed to drive back to Love Field, get on the airplane, and then fly down to Austin, and he was going to give a speech at the convention center. And you can see the sign over on the left, welcome President John F. Kennedy. Now, of course, he never made it there. And then after that speech, they were going to head out to the Lyndon Baines Johnson Ranch, and they were going to have a barbecue, and they were going to spend the night, and then they were going to fly back to Washington, D.C. the next morning, Saturday morning. So that was the plan. It didn't quite work out that way. So let's talk about the motorcade. Here's President Kennedy. They've gotten in the limousine. They've decided to drop the top. We'll talk about the car in just a moment. There's Jackie, and then the red roses in the center, and that's Governor Conley. And so the presidential car was a blue, presidential blue metallic 1961 Lincoln Continental. It looks black in a lot of photos, but it's actually kind of like a bluish black. But there was three different ways they could operate it. They could use it as a convertible. As Brad was mentioning earlier, they had a bubble top that they could put on it to kind of allow the president to see and be seen, but kind of protect him from the elements, so to speak. And then it could be used as a hard top. And it was decided, because the weather had warmed up and gotten sunny, that they would use it as a convertible in this particular instance. And the car is on display at Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, it was not uncommon for President and Mrs. Kennedy to travel around in open cars and motorcades. I always think this is a cute photo of the two of them. Again, going back to well, they had a terrible marriage and she was suffering. And not saying there wasn't some of that, but when you see pictures of her, she's frequently smiling in public. Now, this was before he was elected president. FYI. But again, it was common for them to travel in open cars. It was just kind of a thing that people did back then. This is when he was a senator, before he was president. And then this is during the 1960 presidential campaign. Jackie's got a super excited look on her face.
Another thing that I think gets lost is that he was like the most eligible bachelor in Washington long before he met Jacqueline.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he did choose her. I I think, and they chose each other. I believe she was engaged or almost engaged when she first met him.
Yeah, she
Um,
was engaged and she broke off the engagement, not because of him, but just wasn't.
yeah,
Yeah,
you can never
they were
really
both in
understand.
demand.
Yeah, you can never understand other people's relationships, and it's really a loser's game to try to. But there was a reason why they were together, and there were probably more than one reason. But they were a complex couple, and they offered each other a lot, but there was not a perfect relationship. And you tell me who has a perfect relationship? So.
I mean, I do, but I realize not everyone's as lucky to be married to some amazing person like Michelle. But hey, that's just the way it goes. But mine is. But
But
can't speak
well,
for
no,
everybody else.
there, and of course, you have to take into consideration, the times they were living in. That certainly doesn't excuse all my God, his infidelities, his numerous infidelities. But it's.
Oh yeah, no, that's
Well,
true. But
I think they had a certain bond, but there were so many problems that got in the way.
oh yeah, no, that's true. I mean that's like a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
I don't want this to be the JFK assassination tour, not the JFK infidelity
I just find it
program.
painful when these programs devolve into like almost exclusively cynical comments because it tends to obscure the actual events that were happening and the complexity of it. And I don't know, to me, cynicism has never accomplished anything great.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. I mean it. I mean, the one hand they are like so interesting couple and multifaceted. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the topic for tonight. It's trying to stay focused on this and
I
uh,
think
not go too far off at a tangent. Although, again, they're fascinating people, and he was the president, and she was the first lady, and there's all these different facets to him. So, but you know what? We'll save some of those for a future
I
day.
know from this that they didn't end their marriage by divorce or any of the other things.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Mr. Oswald took care of that.
Oh yeah.
oh my.
But
Well,
I
I
love this
don't think,
photo. It's like, well, she looks really
yeah,
happy in this picture. Now,
yeah,
granted, this was before
yeah,
they went to the
flirtatious,
White
and
House.
I think it's very difficult to find that sweet spot between this, excuse. Well, it was just they were just creatures of their era, their time, but then there's the opposite extreme of attacking them.
Oh yeah,
Um,
no,
it's
very
very
true.
difficult to find that middle, that balance. No
Oh
one
yeah.
has done it.
Oh yeah, no, very true. But anyway, the reason why I was showing these photos just it was common for them to be riding in open cars, whether they were campaigning or parades, and even after he was president. Now these are all photos from before he was president, including this one as well. This particular photo, Jackie's actually pregnant with John Jr.
I don't
Uh,
think I've ever seen another photo of her wearing purple.
oh really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't realize
it's not
that.
her best color either, if you look at that.
Hmm. Oh, I don't know.
That
I like that. I like that color on her, but I also like purple. Okay, so then this is their inauguration. They're riding in an open car. And then this photo was actually taken in downtown Washington, D.C. This is actually just a few weeks before the assassination. I don't remember the exact date of this photo, but you can see he's riding in a motorcade. Look, and this, look at this. He's actually standing up in this photo. He would have been an easier target, so to speak, in this particular instance.
That might be Haile Selassie of Ethiopia in the car with him.
That's a
Oh yeah,
good
it does
guess.
look a lot like him.
Mhm. Let's see. And then
Does anybody know what
Jackie.
he
Jackie and her sister went to India. Now, President Kennedy didn't accompany her. It was a solo trip. But even there, she's by herself and not with her husband. I mean, and look, even she's riding around in an open car in another country of all places. So this is India. Jackie took this very famous trip to India. Did a
Yes,
lot of work.
Jackie was a natural ambassador. Caroline certainly inherited those talents, and I think it was just a much more naive time.
Hmm. Oh yeah, well, different era as well. Here they are traveling through Mexico. I know one's gonna be like, "Oh God, Mexico." Well, he's driving through here, open car, nothing happened. Again, different era, but oh, look at all the people that came out. And then here's a photo. President Kennedy famously took a trip back to Ireland, and of course the locals went crazy there because of his Irish ancestors. But same thing, he's riding around a car. So the point being with all these photos is the motorcade through Dallas in the convertible was not like a unique one-time event because hear people say all that. Oh, why was he in the motorcade with the convertible top down? That was crazy. Well, it was just something that people did back then. It was really common. You can even see the people out here, looking out the windows and stuff. So even in foreign countries, it was safe to do so.
And
Um,
if you really think about it, I mean, if there's anything else, all of these series of pictures drives home. There is no way that Secret Service men on the ground can actually protect any one given person in these types of situations.
oh, that's an excellent point, Patty. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, I
and
mean, they can
and
only do so much.
that's
What's that,
why they
Fred?
so far the other way with all the later presidents.
Hmm.
I mean, they
Oh, yeah.
they learned a lot from this, and I don't think there'll ever be a bubble top or a non bulletproof limousine for the president again.
Hmm. Oh yeah, and it's a very different era. Yeah, I mean now things are much more controlled, but they have to be. There's been no presidents assassinated since Kennedy, but there's been numerous close calls.
Yeah,
Reagan and Ford, and I mean he wasn't president at the time, but even Donald Trump. And so yeah, it's just we live in a crazier era, unfortunately. Let's see. All right, let me queue up some more videos. I gotta pause the recording.
That was that Mrs. Connolly that said that, or
Yes, yeah, Nellie Conley. Mhm.
yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
So again, this is President Kennedy driving through downtown Dallas. This is Main Street, the motorcade, all the people. It's a bright, beautiful day, warm weather. This is one of the more famous photos of the Kennedy side. This is just moments before he was shot. You can see the motorcycle, police right there, all the people standing along the street. This is Clint Hill. We'll talk about him a little bit later and his courageous act posted by the same photo. So you can see President Kennedy, Mrs. Kennedy, Governor Conley, Mrs. Conley, and then Secret Service drivers with their contingent of Secret Service behind them. And then again, here's Clint Hill. So he was the guy who ran up to the car and jumped on board. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Look at all the smiling people. And then this is one of the last photos taken before the actual assassination. Jackie's got a big smile on her face. Even President Kennedy smiling. And of course, he was shot and killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theories of related to the Kennedy assassination. Um, I'll be perfectly frank with you. I don't believe any of the conspiracy theories, and I've researched this case a lot. And I think the people that are into the conspiracy theories, they tend to kind of forget about or exclude a lot of facts. And I don't really want to go off in that whole tangent because you could do a separate program. I was thinking maybe someday I'd do a program about why I don't believe any of the conspiracy theorists, but I want to save that for another day. I don't want to get distracted and give that credence because I actually think it's kind of disrespectful to President Kennedy. But you know what? If someone has a different opinion, they're totally entitled to it. This is where he was shot. The building is called the Book Depository. So what happened was the presidential motorcade traveling down the street here. They end up making a left turn, and Oswald is up here on the sixth floor of the book depository. He fires three shots. If you believe in the Warren Commission, which I do, if you don't, that's totally fine, but we'll save that debate for another day. Here's the building in more modern times. And so the motorcade traveled down the street here, right towards the building, and then they made a left turn and when they made the left turn is when President Kennedy was shot. And this is the window that Oswald was perched from. This was the Texas School Book Depository. So the Texas school system would store the textbooks that they would use and distribute to the schools. So they would be shipped from the publishers to this book depository. They'd be stored here and then they'd be shipped out to the schools from there. And Lee Harvey Oswald got a job working here and then this is the view from the window of the depository. So this would have been Oswald's view. The motorcade traveling down this street here where the arrow is, they make a left turn. This is Houston Street. They make a left turn onto Elm Street. And right along here is where President Kennedy was shot. Now the trees was tall back then, so he wouldn't have had that obscured view.
And I think it was theorized that he actually, because the route was so well published, that he chose that particular spot because it gave him the longest view um, into the motorcade from that particular point.
Oh yeah, and he's on a top floor and he's high up. This
He's
part
got
of the
the view
building was
down the approach street, and then you still got the space going toward the trademark.
yeah. So the motorcade traveled down here, made a right turn. So Oswald's working in this building, so it was really convenient for him. I mean, if he was working over here or over here, um, history probably would have turned out differently. And the three red blocks are where President Kennedy was shot. And then,
Yes, Clint, it was because he worked there, but that's the window that gave him the largest amount of view. Yes.
mhm.
Oh my gosh.
Let's see. So this is a picture that was taken after the assassination. So there was already a lot of people that were out to view the motorcade, but then after the shooting, a lot of people that were curious, wanted to know what's going on, came to the site. It's got this big Chevrolet uh, advertisement in the background. Here's the window that he shot from, and then again that photo that we saw before. So you can see President Kennedy. Is a very easy target. No, like, I always kind of wonder, like, what would have happened if they would have switched seats? Um, would that have impacted anything? Who knows? And then this is one of the last photos taken before he was shot. And again, here's Clint Hill. We'll talk about him in just a minute. Here's President Kennedy's car. And this is like a second before the shooting started. And you can see Jackie just happens to look over to the left. And if you're interested in the grassy knoll, that's like over here to the left out of the picture. And then here's the motorcade. So Zapruder is, let's see, standing right here. You can't see him because of the sign. This is what's known as the grassy knoll, and here is Clint Hill, and of course here's Jacqueline Kennedy, and here's President Kennedy right here, and then here's another view. So this is the view that Zapruder would have had. There's a hill right here. And it's really eerie to go to this site and actually see this because so many people have seen the Zapruder film. To actually stand on that spot where we've watched this video that was taken is really an eerie kind of experience. So here's Abraham Zapruder. He's the guy that famously took the home video of the President Kennedy assassination. He was the owner and manager of a clothing company that was located in the building across the street from the book depository. And he had just bought this camera and the video camera, which was a pretty much a novelty back then. It was a Bell and Howell. And I actually purchased the same type of camera. I saw one for sale on eBay and I bought it. And I bring it when I um, give my in-person tours, and people are really amazed. Like number one, how heavy it is. I don't know the weight, but it weighs a lot, and the viewfinder is really tiny. So people have really enjoyed looking through that. It's interesting. But next time I do the in-person tour, I'll be sure to bring it again. The Zapruder film is a silent 8 millimeter color motion picture sequence shot by Abraham Zapruder with a Bell and Howell home movie camera as United States President John F. Kennedy's motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. Unexpectedly, ended up capturing the president's assassination, which was really interesting, displayed in the movie Parkland. Even though it is not the only film of the shooting, the Zapruder film is considered to be the most complete one, giving a relatively clear view from a somewhat elevated position on the side from which the president's fatal head wound is visible. It was an important part of the Warren Commission hearings and all the subsequent investigations of the assassination, and it is one of the most studied pieces of film in history. If you're interested, I'm actually going to show the Zapruder film a little bit later if you're watching us live. But we'll do that a little bit later. Here's an advertisement for the camera. Again, it really weighs a lot. I don't know the exact weight, but it's pretty heavy. It's not like something you can just stick in your pocket. And
Modern technology weighed a whole lot more back then.
yeah, technology. Yeah, great point, Patty. Technology weighed a whole lot more back then. And let's see. And then again, this is an illustration. So the motorcade travels down here, they turn left. So here's Zapruder. So he couldn't have picked a better spot to capture the event. So kind of ironic of all the places he just ended up being there. And I've often kind of also wondered too, how would the Kennedy assassination be, say, perceived or interpreted if it wasn't captured on this video? Who knows? And again, we talked about the Kennedys, the first modern first couple, including even the death of President Kennedy, captured on video and televised. So kind of interesting. Now, it wasn't live broadcast, of course, the video of the shooting, because Zapruder was a private individual. The video didn't come out till much, much later. These are stills of the video, which I'll show a little bit later if you're interested in seeing that. Although I have to
If,
warn you, a little bit graphic. What's that, Patty?
if I remember correctly, yeah, there was a great deal of discussion, even among the Life magazine people at the time. And I think the first time they published it, they left out a couple of frames.
Yeah, they left out the goriest part
Yeah.
of the frames. Good point, which kind of helped contribute to the conspiracy theories. Now, again, I don't want to get off in the conspiracy theory thing, but one thing, some people theorize that maybe he was also shot in the grassy knoll. This is where that area is. So it would have been like a frontal type of shot. This at this point in time, President Kennedy's already been shot, but if you kind of picture the motorcade being over here to the right, so that's what the infamous grassy knoll is. And then here's heroic Clint Hill. So he's a Secret Service guy. He's standing on the riding board of the car behind, and when he hears the shots go off, he immediately springs to action. Now, this was extremely dangerous on his part. First of all, he's wearing a suit and dress shoes. He jumps off the car behind President Kennedy's presidential limousine and races at full speed up and jumps on the back of the car, which that was extremely dangerous. He could have, just one thing, the fact that he had the wherewithal to act so quickly is incredible. Number one. Number two, the fact that he was in his suit and dress shoes, able to catch up to the car, which was moving. I mean, imagine running up to a car that's driving down the road. Now, granted, it wasn't going 55 miles an hour, but that being said, still quite an achievement. And number three, had he fallen off the car, he would have been run over by the car behind him. So he really risks his life to intervene in this situation. And, at this point in time, no one knew the extent of the shooting. Here's a picture of him sliding into the back seat. So his objective here is to protect the president and first lady from any potential shooting. No one knows how many shooters there are or what's going on, but really incredible that he springs in action. So really one of the more interesting stories of the Kennedy assassination, Clint Hill. He actually just passed away a few months ago. He wrote a number of books, was a very accomplished speaker. So probably do a whole program just on his life and career, which was really fascinating in that regard.
And if
Let's
you think about it, if he had been dressed in anything other than a dark suit and dress shoes, he would have stood out and everybody would have known who the Secret Service guys were.
Right, exactly. And then here's kind of the photo of, transposed over the way it looks in modern times. The Zapruder film was shot, say, over here to the right of the screen. And then let's see, if you go to Dallas, again, it's really eerie to stand on the spot where Zapruder took the film, just because people have seen it and are so familiar with it. They actually have X's on the street where the bullet struck Kennedy. That's kind of an unusual feature, especially when you see people. This is actually a really busy street, and you'll see people out here like standing, taking pictures and stuff. And I'm always really super nervous when I see it, like, oh my God, someone's going to get hit
Yes.
by a car, because it's the busy street. There's traffic going through it. I hear Joanne laughing, what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. It's like, God, you're gonna get, man or woman killed, in front of Kennedy assassination spot, trying to take selfie or something, run over by a truck or whatever. Um, so that's crazy. And then this is right after the assassination. So these people heard the gunshots. They're ducking for cover. The people with the cameras are trying to record what's going on. The police and motors. As soon as the shooting took place, the motorcade sped up because they knew something was going on. The cops on the motorcycles trying to catch up to them, because probably a delayed reaction knowing what's going on. And then here's the book depository in more modern times. Oswald shot from this corner window on the sixth floor. This is now a museum. So you can walk around and visit the Dealey Plaza on your own for free. It is a public park. The book depository building itself is a museum. It's paid admission, but it's really worthwhile. It has a lot of great information, not only on the Kennedy assassination, but also the legacy of President Kennedy. And then a block or two away is the Kennedy Memorial Plaza. It's a memorial to John F. Kennedy. It's designed by the famous architect Philip Johnson. It's kind of, I would say, a little bit controversial in the sense it's a little bit different in terms of a memorial, but you have to remember back in 1963, we didn't really have a lot of presidential memorials around the country, or at least outside of Washington, D.C. But that being said, it is what it is. And then I'll check back in with you guys, Patty, Brad, and Joy in just a moment, but continuing just for a second. So the car that Kennedy was shot and killed in was still used as a presidential limousine. They converted it to a hardtop, though, for safety, and it was used for many years after the assassinations. I mean, how would you like to be president and driving around in the car that Kennedy was killed in? That's actually what ended up happening. But if you want to see the car, it's at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, which, oh, by the way, also has the Rosa Parks bus, among other things. And here's another view of the car. Some people are kind of surprised that it's a hard top, but again, they reconfigured it after the shooting. And talk about that other stuff in a minute. So, Patty, Brad, Joanne, any thoughts on the latest segment?
Yeah, I found that remark you made interesting. You're right. There were nowhere near as many monuments to presidents. We've come to a point in our experience where everything, it seems like, is treated as some momentous occasion. And this event, I think, really changed the perspective of a lot of people on what is history versus what is the stuff that goes along with history. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear,
Hmm.
but
Oh, yeah, no, I understand.
there was a point when not everything that happened was considered massive.
Hmm.
Um, and this changed. I think this began to change it when I said that the conspiracy theories were born with this event. Yeah, it started a whole different approach or perspective on what mattered, and people getting completely caught up in trivia. And I think that is, well, I'm not even going to use the word again because it does it does bother me a little bit because I think it messes up our perspective on the world and on life in general.
Hmm. Well, yeah, even in Dallas, I mean, I'm not a native, so Joanne, maybe you can speak to this, but in Dallas, there was kind of this attempt to kind of forget about this. Like
Exactly.
even these historic, there you can't see it, but there's a historical marker right here, and there's another one further down the road, and then there's another one over here. According to locals, those were just installed a few years ago. For the longest time, there wasn't really much here other than that memorial. And then even this building, there was talk for a long time of tearing it down because the historical significance of it in a negative way. Like I remember seeing an article that said, Tom Landry says book depository should be torn down. It's like, well, I appreciate that, Tom
Did you
Landry.
really say
Great.
that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can
Wow.
Google it. I'm like, I appreciate that, Tom Landry, great football coach of the
Yeah,
Cowboys. But yeah, I'd have to disagree. I think the building should stay up.
yeah, strongly.
But
I
what
would
about
say,
you, Joanne? What was your kind of thoughts on Dallas and the response to the assassination?
well, first of all, anyone if you're in Dallas area, by all means, go to the 6-4 Museum. I know a lot of people who live in Dallas who've never been there. And I say, you just be a tourist in your own city. Just take that Saturday off and just do it. It's well worth it. Yeah, there was a lot of controversy about making a museum out of it. There's this view that we shouldn't remember the tragic moments of our history, but there's that cliche that if we don't remember our history, including the tragic moments, we are destined to repeat it. Um,
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
and so, yeah, I very strongly believe that these moments must be remembered.
Okay, well, thank you. Patty and Brad, any other thoughts?
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. These must be remembered, and
It's
hopefully,
yeah, some perspective on that nobody's going to deny that the assassination of a sitting president is a historic event. That's not what I meant by, but not every single thing that happens. And this 24-hour news, I think, has gotten people hooked on this whole idea that every moment of every day is a huge event, and it's not. And it does screw up the perspective on what is significantly important and what is important in passing, maybe, but is not an earth-shattering event. That's all I meant.
No, it's okay. Let's see. Yeah, if you get a chance, check out. I think Clint Hill actually wrote 3 books. This was the first one. There's a lot of videos of him speaking about the Kennedys. He was really close to Jackie Kennedy, including after the assassination. Got to know her really well, and just really interesting all-around guy. And he actually felt kind of guilty for. He was like, "Oh, maybe I could have done something," which of course is not true at all. And it was interesting. He passed away a few months ago, and I was really happy to see the huge outpouring of condolences and respect for him. Let's see.
I just have one more comment to make about Dallas. But after the assassination happened, and of course Dallas got in, the global news. Um, the city started to really worry about its reputation, because there were a lot of extreme right wing groups, John Birchers, and Dallas. They tried to start making an attempt to show that yes, we have culture. Maria Callas had some of her greatest successes in Dallas, and yeah, it's fascinating to see how the assassination ended up changing Dallas.
Hmm. Oh yeah, in a big way, and I know that just from living here a short period of time and not being from here. So, all right, let's continue on. Let's see. Okay, so these I think these photos they're difficult to look at, but they are interesting. So this is when okay, so the motorcade was supposed to go to the trademark, but then after he got shot, they didn't go to the trademark. Of course, they phoned up ahead to Parkland Hospital, and they brought him in there. And Parkland really didn't have much of warning that he was coming. That was nicely portrayed, I thought, in the movie Parkland. But these are pictures of what's going on outside and in the hospital after President Kennedy's rose. So this is actually the car. You can see the roses are strewn all over the back seat. And Jackie was sitting right here. President Kennedy was sitting right here. You can see the shocked look on these people's faces. They kind of sort of know what's going on, but don't know all the details. So really, really interesting facial expressions in some of these photos. This is the Secret Service. Now, again, they don't know what's going on. Is there like a coup taking place, or is some foreign country trying to attack us, or what's happening? So the first many minutes and hours, kind of like 9/11, in certain regards, that people weren't really sure what was happening. It took a while to kind of process things. They didn't know it was a lone individual person. Then here's the car right here. I think they parked it and then they moved it. They pulled it up a little bit, so I don't think that was the original spot. I think. Let's see. Here's people kind of listening in. Oh, what's that?
I think you're correct. At first, they just like pulled up and stopped, and that's what
Yeah,
happened. People started looking into the car, and it was pretty gory. So
yeah,
somebody had the presence of mind to move it after a little while.
yeah. It's a black and white photo, but there would have been blood on the seats, and so yeah, they just pulled up and like, oh, hey, wait a minute, it's not good to leave the car out here. Let's pull it up closer to the building and block it off. Let's see. And then, okay, so here's people kind of listening in on the radio to try and find out what the heck is going on. Even though the president's inside, there's not, any news announcement coming out. And again, this is before the 24-hour news cycle of like CNN and social media and all that stuff. So news traveled much slower back then. Let's see, some concerned people is kind of milling about, wondering what's going on. And after a while, people started to think that maybe this wasn't going to work out because the initial thing was, oh, President Kennedy's been shot. Well, that could mean a lot of things. It could have mean he just got grazed in the ear. It could have mean he got shot in the back. But then, okay, well, then he got shot in the head. That's not going to be an easy thing to survive. And then you can see all these concerned people. So at this point in time, it hasn't been announced that President Kennedy's been killed. It's just that he's been shot. Maybe some people know that he's been shot in the head and he's inside the hospital. And then the doctors kind of, the press, of course, shows up and wants to know what's going on. And they're providing a limited amount of information. They hadn't really fully publicly announced yet all the details, of course.
Just the way you were saying that, Robert, it reminds me of the actual live broadcast when the guy realizes what happened. He says he's been shot. President Kennedy has been shot. I remember that like clear as day. That's
Oh yeah.
exactly
Hmm.
what happened as he was reporting on the motorcade.
Yeah, really, really incredible. And we were talking about this during the movies. Like, God, imagine what would have been like to, go through that experience. This would have been horrific. Here's doctors kind of providing the update. Um, and of course, the situation was not good. And then so okay, so this was a timeline. And again, if you joined us a little bit later, the timeline, I'll have it extended down to the end of the page, but later on in the program. So if you want to, I don't know, take a screenshot of this or a picture with your phone, you're more than welcome to do so. But you probably want to wait till we get close to the end. But anyway, so okay, so President Kennedy shot 12:30. It took only 6 minutes for the limousine to arrive at the hospital, and it was only 10 minutes after he had been shot that Walter Cronkite came on and announced that President Kennedy had been shot. We'll actually hear that clip also a little bit later. And then, it's pretty incredible from like a stamina standpoint to think that President Kennedy was shot in the head and he lived for 30 minutes. That's pretty unbelievable. Those shots are usually immediately fatal. So that's pretty incredible. Now, of course, eventually the news comes out that the president has died. And so these are pictures of people that have heard the news of what's happened, and of course, much more emotion. So the pictures before were kind of more like concern, and now the grief and the shock and the anger and all that stuff is setting. And there's actually a ton of photos from this part of the event. I could probably show you 100. I kind of had to kind of narrow it down to the say more interesting or noteworthy ones. But again, just
Dan Paulson mentioned something that really is a historical detail, just because I bet you there are people watching this that don't even know what a phone booth is. But yes, that the reporters that were on scene were like rushing to the any phone booth that was available and then wouldn't leave because there wasn't another phone anywhere and nobody had a cell phone at the moment. So,
yeah, yeah, really
uh,
limited phone capability back then.
yep.
How are you going to get a hold of somebody?
Yes, it's
Uh,
so hard to believe there was a time when people didn't have cell phones.
oh yeah, yeah. I remember my dad used to travel for work, and he would, as soon as the plane would land, he'd have to go to the payphone and call us, and we'd be sitting by the phone waiting. And of course, there was no internet, so we couldn't tell if the plane was delayed or not. Just all the
Imagine Superman
drama
trying to
of that
change
calls.
into a suit in a cell phone.
Yeah, exactly. Um, this is a really touching photo. There's a lot of really fascinating photos related to the Kennedy assassination. This one is an interesting one. So this is Robert Kennedy. He was back in he lived outside of Washington D.C. in the Northern Virginia suburb. He's at home, and he's just gotten the news that his brother, the president's been shot. Now, at this point in time, it hadn't been announced that he was killed, and he just so happened to be with his children at this point in time. So you can see he's comforting his kids, probably just trying to process what's going on. But this is when moments after he got the news that his brother had been shot. But at this point in time, the further details that he had been killed had not come out yet, but a touching photo nonetheless. And of course, Robert Kennedy himself would be assassinated 5 years later. And then this is Johnson. So initially, Johnson's holed up inside the hospital. And once President Kennedy was pronounced dead, okay, now he's the president. And again, people don't know what the heck is going on. Is this some kind of coup, or is this foreign government trying to take over or something? And so they decide, well, you got to get Johnson out of here and get him on a plane and get the heck out of here because this is too hot, so to speak, of a situation. And then Cronkite comes on and announces that Kennedy, first he announced that Kennedy had been shot. And then a little bit later, he announced that Kennedy had been killed. We'll actually show a clip of that in a little bit later as well. All right, let's pause for the recording so we can check out these. So, a really incredible paradox is kind of the happiness and the joy of Jacqueline Kennedy and President John F. Kennedy um, disembarking Air Force One. And then a short time later, after President Kennedy died, they get a casket and put him inside. And so this is the Secret Service, and they're actually carrying the casket that has President Kennedy in it um, back into Air Force One. And this was not long after um, they had disembarked the plane, and you can actually see Jackie over here on the right watching. I mean, that's her husband. He just got murdered alongside of her. And then I always thought this is a really incredibly sad photo. This is Jackie climbing up into Air Force One all by herself. And the paradox between this photo where she's coming down the stairs, she's with her husband, it's this great day, she's really happy, and then you fast forward less than an hour and a half later, and she's climbing up the stairs by herself with her husband in a casket. He'd been killed. So just an unbelievable turn of events in such a short period of time. I can't think of anything in American history, with the exception of maybe like, I don't know, 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or something, where something so monumental.
Wait a
Uh,
minute, Ryder.
what's that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I had my mic on.
Oh, it's okay, no problem. But yeah, just really incredible turn of events. But yeah, really sad photo to see Jackie walking up the stairs of Air Force One all by herself after coming down it. Let's see. So then remember, Jackie just 15 weeks earlier had lost her son Patrick, and so now she's dealing with this death of her husband. So the fact that she was able to kind of maintain her composure as well as she did after the death of her husband is incredible. But you combine that with the fact that she had also lost her son. Gosh, what a tough 15-week stretch for her.
Yeah, and
And
someone made a great comment that this was the end of Camelot. And I think it's so poignant because it just shows how the fragility of life.
oh yeah, it can end at any time. And sorry, I misspoke earlier. I said an hour and a half. It was actually 2 hours and 36 minutes. So they got off the plane at 11:44, and he was shot and then died, and then they left the hospital and they reboarded the plane 2 hours and 36 minutes later. So wow. And then it's okay. So this is the timeline. If you want to take a picture of this or a screenshot of this. So again, they landed at Love Field 11:38. 14 minutes later, 11:52, the presidential motorcade leaves Love Field. 12:30, the president's shot. 6 minutes later, the limousine arrives at Parkland. Cronkite, remember, initially he came on. They didn't have the camera set up, so he just had to talk that President Kennedy had been shot. 1 p.m., 30 minutes later, after the shooting, it was announced that President or the hospital determined President Kennedy died. Johnson got the heck out of there because they were worried for his safety. Oswald was captured relatively quickly. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then 2:08, President Kennedy's body and Mrs. Kennedy depart Parkland Hospital. Lyndon Johnson sworn in as president at 2:38. So an hour and 38 minutes after President Kennedy was pronounced dead. The Air Force One left Love Field at 2:47, and it arrived back in Washington, D.C. at Andrews Air Force Base at 5:58. Now, these times here are all Texas time or Central time, and this particular one is Eastern time. That would have been uh, 4:58. What's that?
That wasn't me, but I just wanted to make one point regarding Camelot wasn't born until that William Manchester interview, sometime after the burial had already happened. But
Oh,
that's
yeah.
one of those
We'll talk
things that
about that
gets
too.
confused,
Oh, yeah,
that,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. Let's see, because yeah, I have some more information about half that. So this is inside Air Force One. The plane's not departed yet. They wanted Johnson to take the oath before he actually before the plane took off, just for like, I don't know, safety, security purpose, whatever. You can see Jackie in her blood-stained pink Chanel suit standing right next to him. Here's Lady. I mean, imagine I feel like the term surreal is overused, but God, what a surreal moment this must have been for her. She's standing next to Johnson taking the oath of office to replace her president, who'd just been murdered alongside of her in the motorcade.
And compare that look of shock to the beautiful smiles she had had just an hour or two
Yeah.
earlier.
Well, yeah.
Um,
And Judge Sarah Hughes is administering the oath. And, Texas nowadays gets on worst worst states for women list, but at one time people were saying, what do they put in the water? Because the state had so many powerful pioneering women.
Hmm.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
that's a
Yes,
great
Sarah
point.
Hughes is one of them.
Yeah, that's a
Anne
great
Richard,
point.
Molly Ivins, yeah.
Yes, Molly, Ann Armstrong, Janis Joplin,
Yeah.
Sarah Weddington.
Ann
I mean, just a
Richards,
long, long, yeah, Ann
Lady
Richards,
Bird
Barbara,
Johnson. She was
Barbara
a
Jordan. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Lady Bird Johnson. She was a multimillionaire businesswoman before she became first lady. And then so I was kind of one another disappointment in the Jackie film. They kind of really showed her all alone after the swearing in, and maybe she felt that way emotionally, but the photos are very different than the way it was, and you can see the people standing around comforting her. And it's a state of shock of what's transpired and what's taking place. So then after the oath of office, um, they end up departing for Washington, D.C. Again, not sure what the heck is going on. They want to get Johnson airborne, thinking maybe he's probably a little bit safer there. And of course, the safest place they're thinking is back in Washington, D.C. Similar thing to President Bush in 9/11. They wanted to get him the heck out of the school where he was at and get him airborne just because they're not sure what's going on. But there's still a country to run, and so who knows? Maybe this might be some kind of foreign power trying to take over the United States by toppling the government hierarchy. So they're kind of briefing him on what's going on, and of course they also want to know what about the shooter and what's the situation with that.
And most of the people that were responsible for keeping the country going were not able to talk to each other as all this was happening. So
Yeah.
very confusing for people who were trying to make decisions at the time, or very stressful, shall we say.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Patty. I appreciate that. So, okay, Air Force One takes off, heading back to Washington, D.C., although with a new president. President Kennedy's body is in a coffin inside the airplane. If you actually want to see this Air Force One that was used, it's on display. It's at the really an excellent museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force, which is in Dayton, Ohio, which is north of Cincinnati. It's a really great museum to visit, not just because of this plane, but the whole um, Air Force history. And oh, was someone going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that was one of the reasons they wanted to get back to the plane because that was the only place that they had a more complex communication system so they could actually communicate with Washington.
Yeah, a lot easier to. Great point, Patty. A lot easier to communicate from here than like say some back room at Parkland Hospital. They got more of the people and infrastructure all in one place.
Yet the
Um,
problem with President Bush on 9/11 on Air Force One. Apparently, he found the communications. They couldn't do any video or anything from the
yeah, they
phone, so they've redone that.
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even back then, which was not that long ago, he ran into a lot of technical problems trying to communicate with during all that
Yeah, 'cause even
chaos.
telephone infrastructure gets overwhelmed, especially back 60 some odd years ago. So,
Mhm. Let's see. So eventually the plane arrives back in Washington, D.C. This is the casket of President Kennedy being taken off Air Force One. And then here's Jackie. So when the plane landed, Robert Kennedy rushed on board to greet Jackie. I thought this was very chivalrous of him, a little bit different than the way he was depicted in the Jackie film. Rushes on board the plane. He didn't want Jackie coming off the plane all by herself. So you can see there he's holding her hand, and he's with her by her side. President Kennedy's body has been put inside this hearse, and then here she is. You can still see the blood on her suit, and just the state of shock that must have been. I wasn't alive during the President Kennedy assassination, and it wasn't the same exact event, but I remember 9/11 and just for how many hours I was shocked of what had happened. I didn't even have any personal connections to 9/11. And then you can imagine these people at this point in time that were experiencing this live and in person, how difficult that must have been. And of course, top story in the news. Was someone going to say something?
it wasn't until this moment, which was quite a few hours later, that Johnson was even able to speak to the American people. And that was a huge moment, too,
Mhm.
because we were all cut off. We didn't know what was happening. It was all happening after all that. kind of live television that nobody really knew anything because everything was happening on board Air Force One and between Air Force One and Washington. So it was like this long period where it's like, so now what? You know?
Yeah. And why did this happen and who did it and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Took a while for that to get out. Thanks, Patty. Appreciate you mentioning that. Of course, this was top story in the news. It's really, I always find it, maybe because I like media and I like history, it's always fascinating to go back and read like historical accounts of some important event that's taken place, whether it was the Kennedy assassination or the Civil War or World War II or Vietnam or whatever. So just interesting going through these different media coverages of the event that took place. Here's an interesting photo. Of course, this was top news for an extended period of time. Let's see. So this is a famous Saturday Evening Post cover by Norman Rockwell, and then they reused the portrait for the memorial issue to President Kennedy. And when I lived in Washington, D.C., I knew this guy that actually worked at the White House. He wasn't like officially working for President Kennedy, but I did see him on a regular basis. And he told me that this portrait he thought was the most realistic, lifelike depiction of President Kennedy that he had seen. So I'm like, well, that's good enough for me. So the gentleman really liked that picture portrait. And then let's talk about the aftermath. So Oswald was only 24 years old when he shot and killed Kennedy. I really didn't want to spend a ton of time talking about him. Just, I don't want to glamorize his life or what he did, but talk about him a little bit briefly. He was 24 years old when he got killed. One of the sad aspects of the story, in addition to President Kennedy being killed, this gentleman was also killed. This is Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. He was 39 years old, a family man. He encountered Oswald on a street. How they caught Oswald was they knew he worked in the book depository. And after they realized the shots came from the book depository, they sealed it off and they did a roll call of all the employees. And they discovered that one employee was missing and it was Oswald. And he'd only worked there a short period of time. I don't remember how long exactly he'd been there, but he was kind of an eccentric to begin with. And so we are like, you know what? Everyone's here except for him. The shooting took place in this building, so maybe it's him. So then the people that were working with him described what he was wearing. They put out all points bulletin. Tippett is out on patrol in an area of Dallas known as Oak Cliff, which is a short distance from downtown, and he sees a guy that fits the description of Oswald. And so he pulls his car up alongside of him. Now, we don't know the exact exchange that took place because both of these people ended up getting killed. But supposedly, Tippett pulled up his car alongside Oswald. He rolled down the passenger window and started talking to Oswald. And then Tippett parked his car and got out of the driver's side, proceeded around the front of the car. Oswald pulled out a gun and shot and killed him, and then took off running. Now, fortunately, two people saw Tippett get shot, and they immediately ran inside their homes and called police and were able to describe Oswald. And so that creates a euphoria of police looking for him further. This is actually Tippett's car. So you picture him again. He gets a bulletin to be on the lookout for this guy with a description of Oswald. They don't know that he shot the president, but he's a suspect. Tippett pulls his car down the street, rolls down the passenger window, speaks to Oswald. Again, not sure what he said because Tippett was killed and Oswald was killed shortly thereafter. Then he steps out of his car and walks around the front. And when he does, Oswald pulls a gun out of his jacket and shoots and kills him. And there's a historical marker to J.D. Tippett at this spot. If you're in Dallas, it's in the Oak Cliff section of the city. Here is Tippett's wife and his three children. And of course, they were left fatherless. And so it's sad. He's kind of like the forgotten man of the Kennedy assassination, but he was killed too. He lost his life, and he's a family man. So really sad story. He was only 39 years old. And then the all points bulletin goes out for this guy who shot the cop. And how Oswald got finally caught is he ducked into a shoe store not far from where he shot Tippett. And there was all these police sirens that were heading towards where the officer was shot. and everybody was going out on the street to see what was going on. There's all these sirens wailing and cop cars whizzing by, and everybody was looking to see what the heck was going on, except for this one guy who was like ducked in the shoe store and was kind of like looking out the window kind of suspiciously to see what's going on. Then he left the store, but his suspicious behavior caught the attention of one of the employees. The employee followed him down the street a few doors, and a woman that was working the ticket counter at the Texas Theater went out in the street to see what was going on with all the sirens. Oswald snuck in behind her so he didn't have to buy a ticket and into the movie theater. And then the gentleman who had the wherewithal to follow him from the shoe store told the woman to call the police because she thought his behavior was suspicious. The cops show up, they tell him what happens, they go inside and confront Oswald. He puts up a tussle, but they eventually subdue him and they take him into custody. And this is actually Oswald being escorted out of the theater. So it's actually pretty incredible police work, and also work by just regular everyday citizens helping the police, that Oswald was able to be captured so quickly. He was apprehended an hour and 20 minutes after he shot John F. Kennedy. That's really incredible. So good that they got him. And then, of course, he's arrested and taken to the police station, and there's kind of a bunch of crazy stuff goes on with him. But lo and behold, Jack Ruby, he shows up on the scene, another interesting character in this story. And he is not happy about Oswald, and there's a big whole debate on what his motivations were, but he ends up learning that Oswald's going to be transported from one police facility to another. He shows up there and with a gun shoots Oswald and kills him, which adds a whole nother crazy dimension to this story. This is a famous photo of Ruby shooting Oswald. And then here's the same event from another angle. This gentleman's actually a Texas Ranger police officer, and Oswald did not make it. He survived for a little while, but then eventually he passed away. So no trial for him. He was shot and killed. And then, of course, that's big news as well. Uh, Assassin Oswald slain in Dallas. And then the Kennedy funeral takes place. We'll talk about in a minute. But Brad, Joanne, Patty, any thoughts on this segment?
This was the what was filling up the dead space in between when we learned that he'd been killed, that Kennedy had been killed, and the plane landing in D.C. Most of it was about these odds and ends. I mean, these things were filtering through because by now all the TV stations were on full bore news. So all these little tidbits were, were getting filtered out, and it was getting, like you're saying, more bizarre by the moment. And that following Sunday, when Oswald was killed right there in the police station, it was sort of like, nothing else more bizarre can happen, except by now you're prepared for anything bizarre to happen at any moment. It was just such a weird sensation, all this crazy stuff happening.
Oh yeah, I asked my mom about it, and that was like her main memory, just how this dominated the media coverage, television, newspapers, just even talking with neighbors and friends. I mean, this was the only thing people were talking about for days on end,
Yeah,
not just that
just all
day.
that afternoon, that Friday, these bizarre bits and pieces, coming across, but they were just little sentences because nobody really did know what was happening, because people on the street were trying to fill in, the police who were showing up here and there, but none of this was, being really communicated thoroughly to the nation. So it was just, it's hard to explain how just shocking everything was, because you couldn't predict anything anymore. Nothing was predictable at this point.
Yeah, businesses closed. Yeah. Brad and Joanne, any other thoughts on this segment?
I agree with the chaos that was going on nationwide, and for once, all three networks were on news 24 hours, several days.
I think it's interesting seeing the Texas police officers with their cowboy hats on.
Yeah, the Texas Rangers.
I thought that the scenes in the Parkland movie with the Oswald family were well done, and they did seem true to what was coming out for the several weeks after the assassination. It was very true. And again, I think they made that point about what he had done to his whole family as well. I mean, not just the country, but he had really destroyed so many lives.
Yeah, his mother was completely nuts at the end there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Patty, thanks for reminding me. But okay, yeah. So the Kennedy shooting took place Friday, November 22nd. This is when Ruby, this is his mugshot. So, yeah, Oswald got killed on Sunday. So he wasn't around long, didn't really have much to say before he exited the stage door left, so to speak. Um,
And at the
and
same time,
Yeah.
back in Washington, as this is happening, they're preparing to move the body to the Capitol Rotunda. It, it,
yeah,
it just was, it's so hard to explain how crazy this 3 days and several weeks thereafter. I mean, Thanksgiving was the next week, and
hmm
you
Yes.
can't even imagine what Thanksgiving was like right after this. It was just
hmm
bizarre.
oh,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and this had such a it had a tremendous ripple effect. It completely changed Marina Oswald's life. I mean, I have to admit, I feel sorry for her.
Yes.
And um, also, it reminds me of in Mad Men they did the session, they did an episode on the assassination and how people were reacting,
Oh,
and
yeah. That
you
was a
see
great
people
episode.
just glued to the TV screens. And remember, one fellow says, who's not paying that much attention to it, he said, "I'm not in love with this tragedy."
Yeah, that was a really incredible episode as well. I forgot to
Yeah.
mention, you can see the guy here. He's actually got Oswald handcuffed. Um, so, and then of course the shot was fatal. So interesting. And they actually took him to Parkland Hospital, which they showed in the Parkland movie. So that was kind of bizarre. But yeah, you can actually the house that Oswald, him and his wife split up, and she was staying with a friend. You can actually go visit that house. It's in Irving, Texas, if you're familiar with Dallas. We organized a tour of it last year. It was really fascinating to go um, see that. And then kind of fast forward to the funeral. So here's President Kennedy lying in state at the Capitol, which they end up doing for
So
prominent American
this
dignitaries.
transfer happened shortly after, within hours after Oswald was shot and
Yeah,
died.
yeah, and the story's still, developing, and they don't know all the details like we do now. People still processing and the shock of that. Let's see. So yeah, this is the Capitol Rotunda.
People were actually in church here in New England when Oswald was shot. That's where I was.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
I
Hmm,
learned when I came out of church. Yes.
really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. Let's see. Here is Jackie at the coffin of her husband. Now imagine how difficult this would be. Imagine your significant other passes away and you go to their funeral. Imagine doing it in front of, hundreds and thousands of people and it's being photographed and broadcast on television. I mean, you can't even mourn in private, at least not at this particular aspect. So how incredibly difficult that must have been.
And
Uh,
imagine trying to deal with the father of your young children and your husband, and you have also the responsibility of this nation in total shock.
oh yeah. Touching photo of them leaving the Capitol. And here's the hearse with the casket and going through the streets of Washington. And then this is the casket departing the White House
For
for burial, although they're going to make a stop at the church first.
the walk was from the White House to the church. Yes.
Yeah, several blocks. I think 8 blocks, I thought they said in the film. And I've seen not this particular photo, but um, photos of this particular event. The more famous one is in just a moment. There is Jackie. She's walking with Bobby Kennedy and Ted Kennedy.
And I assume the reason they had in her dialogue with Jack Valenti, the reason they had that remark about de Gaulle was because for the people watching this, that was a big shock to see a figure like de Gaulle, or the figure who was de Gaulle, actually walking in this procession, because apparently nobody thought he would stoop to that level, but apparently it was his admiration for Jacqueline Kennedy that he agreed to do that. So I don't think that exchange actually probably happened, but that was why it was put in there, because that was such a shock to see
Hmm.
de
Oh,
Gaulle
yeah.
walking in the procession.
Yeah, de Gaulle said that Jackie taught the world how to behave.
Yes.
This is one of the more famous photos of the aftermath. Jackie walking with Bobby and Ted.
Look at Ted.
And
He looks like a baby boy in that picture.
oh yeah, very young. And then this is a famous sequence of events. So this is outside the church. And again, there's Ted and Bobby, Jackie with her two kids. And then here's the famous salute John Jr. gave. And wow, imagine how things changed in just from Friday to Monday. And President Kennedy is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, which I recommend visiting if you get a chance.
I believe Rose Kennedy was in that shot, but it went by too fast for me to see if I could see her. No, I guess
Which
she's
one?
like
This one?
slightly off to the right there. But those are the sisters, his two of his
Mhm.
sisters in this, and I'm not sure if that's Pat or not.
Let's see. So one reason why President Kennedy was buried in Arlington Cemetery, well, this is a whole interesting story as well. Um, his family wanted him buried in Massachusetts. They actually talked about that briefly in the Jackie film. She was really adamant, though, that he should be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, which, as a person who lived in Washington, D.C., I can really respect her decision to override his family, and that must have been somewhat courageous on her part. Jackie Kennedy had to do a talk on her again because she really accomplished a lot as First Lady. And in learning about the history of Arlington Cemetery, it's always been an important place. But when President Kennedy was buried there, which was her decision, it really took the popularity of it to a whole nother level and really kind of helped made it the place it is today. But Jackie made that call. And against the wishes of his family, they were putting a lot of pressure on her to have him buried in Massachusetts, but she decided not to. Interestingly enough, just 11 days before the assassination, the Kennedys visited Arlington National Cemetery. And it has, if you've never been there before, it has this great panoramic view of the city. It's on a hill in Arlington, Virginia. And then across the Potomac River is Washington, D.C. It's one of the best views that you're going to get of Washington, D.C. is from Arlington Cemetery. And so John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy were there. And legend has it that he said to her, looking out over the across the Potomac to Washington D.C. This place is so beautiful. I could stay here forever. And then ends up doing just that. And this is the view from the Kennedy gravesite. And this particular photo is not the best. It's the best one in the public domain I could find. But again, this is Washington, D.C., off here in the distance. This is the Washington Monument. This is the Capitol over here. This is the Potomac River. So, really incredible view. And then, of course, this is the gravesite with President Kennedy and then the eternal flame. Here's some pictures from the funeral. That's
There's his mother right there. Yeah.
mhm. And again, still a very grief-stricken nation. And yeah.
Jackie was very afraid that the same thing that happened to Mary Todd Lincoln would happen to her.
Oh yeah, she Mary Todd Lincoln really a lot of financial problems after she left. They didn't have the infrastructure in place to support um, widows, even of presidents. Let's see. And then the funeral taking place at Arlington, burial. Here's Jackie, and here's Bobby.
And this went on for so long. Of course, like so many things, everything took a lot longer than was anticipated. It was actually getting dark before by the time she was lighting the flame, it was actually getting dark.
Yeah, you can see the sun. That's an excellent point, Patty. You can see the sun here is starting to set. And then this is after he was buried. So initially, they didn't do the elaborate grave site because this was so kind of impromptu. But again, I don't want to make it sound like Arlington Cemetery was a place that nobody visited, and then President Kennedy was buried there, and it became a major tourist attraction. But my point is, it really went to like a whole nother level after he was buried there, and that was really Jackie's decision. So kudos to her. If you go visit President Kennedy's gravesite, there's really three kind of main tourist attractions at Arlington. One is the Kennedy gravesite, the other is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and the third being the Lee Custis House, which formerly was inhabited by Robert E. Lee. That's a whole other story for another day. We'll let Harry dive into that. Here's the Kennedy gravesite. And this is John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline's grave. She was later buried there after she passed away. And then the two on the side, it's not John Jr., he was buried at sea. It's their daughter, Arabella. She was actually stillborn before they
Before
went
he
to the
was even
hospital.
elected.
And then their son, Patrick, who I said died shortly before President Kennedy passed away. This is the Lee Custis House in the background.
And Robert Kennedy, where is Robert Kennedy buried? Is
He's
he
buried
buried?
there too, but he's off to the side.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
So
um,
Eddie.
yes. So yeah, you can see John F. Kennedy, born 1917. He died in 1963. There's the eternal flame. Let's see. There's the gravesite. And then we were talking about this before. So Jacqueline Kennedy is the one who actually coined the term Camelot. She gave an interview shortly after President Kennedy passed away to a family friend, and this is a quote that she said. No, this is kind of a summation of different things that transpired. She said in this interview, President Kennedy was strongly attracted to Camelot because he was an idealist who saw history as something made by heroes like King Arthur. At night, before we'd go to sleep, Jack liked to play some records, and the song he loved the most came at the very end of this record, the last side of Camelot, which goes, Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot. And then she goes on to say, There'll be great presidents again, but there'll never be another Camelot. And so Jacqueline Kennedy actually is the one who coined the term Camelot to describe the Kennedy administration. So interesting tidbit for you there. Camelot was a popular musical of the era. And then another thing that Kennedy impact on Washington, D.C. and the nation as whole is the Kennedy Center. The John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy were really a driving force behind this being established. There had been long talk of needing a performing arts center in Washington, D.C. It had been stuck in the mud, so to speak, for years, literally and figuratively speaking. The Kennedys come into the White House. They kind of threw their influence and powers of persuasion behind it, got the um, building going, so to speak. And then when he died, it was decided that this would be named after President Kennedy and be his living memorial. So they don't, in Washington, D.C., there's the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial and all that kind of stuff. This is the memorial for President Kennedy. Sometimes people are on the mall and they're like, hey, how come there's no memorial here for Kennedy like there is for Washington and Lincoln and Roosevelt and all that stuff? Well, this is the memorial to President Kennedy. It's a living memorial and really beautiful structure. If you ever get a chance, you're living in Washington, D.C., if you haven't been to the Kennedy Center, make sure you check it out. Or if you're visiting from out of town, just an incredible number of great performing arts things take place there. They have this famous statue of President Kennedy on the inside. Go check that out and lit up at night, which is really beautiful. It's right along the Potomac River. And oh, when I look at these pictures of the Arlington Cemetery and the Kennedy Center, it just brings back so many fond memories of the years that I lived in Washington, D.C. I lived in Washington, D.C. 8 years the first time and 5 years the second time. So 13 years altogether and just nothing but fond memories of my time there. We were talking about the President Kennedy rating by the C-SPAN Presidential Historian Survey. He was voted eighth most or eighth best president in history. So that's kind of one of his lasting impacts, so to speak, on our nation and the world. And then this was the speech that Kennedy, this is an excerpt from the speech that Kennedy was supposed to deliver at the Trade Mart. But of course, he was shot and killed and wasn't able to deliver this. We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny rather than choice the watchmen of the walls of world freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. President
Another part of his attraction was his talent for um,
Words.
creating inspiration through aspiration.
Yes, I would agree with that, Patty. Let's see. So a few more things to go, and then we'll wrap it up. I actually have some more videos if you're interested, but I'll play those at the very end. So John F. Kennedy, born May 29th, 1917. He was killed on November 22nd, 1963. His wife, Jackie, passed away in 1994. She eventually left Washington, D.C., moved to New York City, and lived the rest of her life based out of there. And
Well,
if
she
we
went to Greece.
what's that?
Until she went to Greece.
Well, yeah, she did have a brief sojourn in Greece. If, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to learn about the Kennedy wedding, I recorded on our YouTube channel. Took place in 1953. Let's see, upcoming programs we have related to history. Wednesday, we're doing the Pilgrims American Experience documentary or docudrama, I guess you could say. We're repeating the Rosa Parks film on Monday, December 1st, and on the 19th, we're doing our Eleanor Roosevelt documentary that we had to postpone from a few weeks ago. And we've been recording this program. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. I'll send out the link as soon as it's available, but keep in mind it's probably going to take a few days for me to do that. Let's see. Let's circle back with our distinguished panel of experts, Patty, Brad, and Joanne. Any final thoughts on the Kennedy before? So we're not done. We still have a couple more videos I'll play. But any final thoughts before we queue up the last videos and call it a night?
So on that Monday, so that whole day, right into evening, was taken up with this whole final goodbye, and I don't think there was a dry eye anywhere. And that's Monday, and 3 days later, we're trying to have some kind of Thanksgiving, and everybody was still kind of walking around like zombies, trying to understand how to process all this. It was a very, very, very sad and bizarre time.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Thanks.
Relatives seeing each other that you see each other at holidays, but nobody knows really what to say to each other because it's all been said and none of it's been said. It's like there's more tears, and but it's not a time for tears, and it was just I was young enough that I had never really lived through anything that extraordinary before, and it just was so bizarre for so long. Even Christmas, I think, was still very, because you normally have the tree lighting ceremony, and I think if I'm not mistaken, they skipped that, or at least didn't do it until much later.
Hmm. Okay. Brad and Joanne, what about you? Any final thoughts before we queue up the final videos and call it a night?
It normally when a president dies, they keep the flag in mourning for 30 days. So I think Patty was right. I think the it would have been until December 22nd. So if they were going to have a public celebration of Christmas, it wouldn't have been until the mourning period was over.
I think you're right. That's exactly what happened. It was after the 30 days. It was just before Christmas that
Yeah.
they did that. Yeah, and it was still
Okay.
very subdued.
Yep.
Okay. Joanne, what about you? Any final thoughts before we queue up the last videos and call it a night?
Well, yes, I think it's interesting to see what millennials and Zoomers their whole approach to this history, because Jackie said, well, Jack's view of history was like as a heroic pursuit. We are growing up in an era, and I think it's quite healthy, where we realize that history is complicated, and we have to parse out, how should I say, the complexities and the mistakes the great leaders did, but also respect the truly extraordinary things they did in this country.
Hmm. Oh yeah, great
And
point.
yeah, there's
History
another
very
thing. One
complicated.
thing I Yeah, one thing I'm absolutely sure of is those pictures. The photos were just so beautiful, so charismatic that they're never ever going to be forgotten. Every generation that comes after us is going to remember them, and we're going to get more and more books about the Kennedy family. That's all there is to it. It's
Oh
never
yeah,
going
more
to stop.
movies and miniseries and all that stuff. More super
Mhm.
programs from Robert and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, your
Mhm.
comments, Joanne, too. That's why cynicism bothers me because you tend to lose the threads, and so you get stuck on a negative path, and it's harder to pick out what the heroic things are and what the complicating things are, because you start following a rabbit hole kind of thing, and yeah, cynicism just never goes anywhere. It other than it takes you off the rails, basically.
Well, in my research, in my travels, I think there are four approaches people take to historic figures. They either idolize them, they honor them, they just acknowledge them, or they trash them. And I think the idea is to stay in that honor zone, stay out of the
Hmm.
idolatry zone, stay out of the, well, they did great work. However, they did this and this and that. Yeah, that's acknowledgement is probably cynicism. And, definitely the family had its problems, but they don't deserve to be trashed.
Hmm. Okay, that's a good point.
It's sort of
Um,
like the idea when people get into arguments over like whether somebody was a saint or not. And I like to point out to people that having lived in a tradition that does recognize saints, saints are usually people known for their journey from clay-footed human beinghood into greater insights. Okay, so you can't really become a saint if you haven't had feet of clay.
And that's exactly one reason why Alice Paul was one of my favorite historic figures.
Exactly.
I
Yes.
had that same type of background, Patty. And I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, sister said, we had to stand in silence in honor of his martyrdom. And I was very much raised with that. And so, yes, so that's exactly why I have such a deep respect for the heroism and the brilliance of Alice Paul.
Well, you know what,
okay.
Joanne, it's interesting that you mentioned that because when you first came in with that remark, before Robert had introduced you, I saw the Alice Paul comment and I immediately went to look for what the context of what you had said because she's one of my heroes as well.
Okay, well, that's excellent. Let's see. So let's call it a night because we've been going on for quite a while. So I do have three short videos to play. They're all very short. Let me stop the recording so we can cue that up. And thanks for joining us, especially thanks to our distinguished panel.